A boy stood alone in a gas station parking lot, holding a crumpled notebook like it was the only weapon he had left in the world. Across the road, 20 motorcycles idled in formation, chrome and black steel gleaming under a sun that burned like a warning. Everyone in Blackridge knew the steel vultures. Everyone crossed the street when they rolled through. But this 8-year-old kid walked straight toward them, stopped in front of the most dangerous man in the lot, and asked a question that turned every head in the county. "Sir, how do you report a bad man?" What happened next? Nobody in that town saw it coming, not the cops, not the neighbors, and definitely not the bad man. Stay with me all the way to the end of this one. You don't want to miss how it lands. Drop a like right now, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Let's ride. The heat came off the asphalt in waves thick enough to taste. Blackridge, Pennsylvania sat in a cradle of dead steel mills and boarded-up machine shops. The kind of town where summer didn't feel like a season. It felt like a slow punishment. The gas station on the corner of Milford and Route 9 had 2 working pumps, a flickering open sign that hadn't been accurate in years, and a parking lot cracked so deep the weeds had given up trying to push through. Eli Mercer stood at the edge of that lot, with a spiral notebook pressed against his chest. The cover was bent. The wire spine twisted from being shoved under mattresses and stuffed inside backpacks too fast. He was small for 8. Thin arms, oversized t-shirt that used to be white, sneakers with the rubber peeling off the toe. His hair hadn't been cut in weeks. His fingernails were bitten down to nothing. He watched the motorcycles across the street the way a stray dog watches a fire, not with fear exactly, but with the careful attention of something that had learned the difference between warmth and burning. 20 bikes, maybe more, lined up outside the old VFW hall like a row of black teeth. The Steel Vultures Motorcycle Club had been part of Blackridge longer than most of the buildings still standing. Their cuts bore a spread-winged vulture over crossed pistons, stitched in silver thread gone gray from road dust and rain. They gathered every Saturday for what the town loosely called a charity ride, food drives for the families the county forgot, supply runs to the veterans' shelter 3 towns over, escort duty for funeral processions that couldn't afford police. Most people in Blackridge didn't care about the charity part. They saw the leather, the scars, the way the vultures didn't smile when they walked into a room. They saw men who looked like they'd been assembled from wreckage and war, and they kept their distance. Eli had been watching them for 6 Saturdays in a row. He crossed the street, not fast, not slow. The deliberate pace of a child who had practiced being invisible and was now forcing himself to be seen. His sneakers scuffed against the curb. He stopped 12 feet from the bikes, close enough to smell the exhaust and leather and old coffee. His fingers tightened on the notebook. Mason Titan Cross stood at the center of the formation with a road map spread across the seat of his heritage soft tail. He was 46, 6'3", built like a man who'd spent 2 decades carrying weight that didn't show on a scale. His beard was streaked gray. A scar ran from his left temple to the hinge of his jaw, a souvenir from Fallujah that he never explained and nobody asked about. His knuckles were scarred, his forearms inked with dates and coordinates that meant nothing to anyone but him. His eyes were the pale blue of frozen water, and when they settled on you, they didn't blink. He noticed the kid before the kid was halfway across the street. Titan straightened, folded the map. He didn't say anything yet. He just watched Eli approach the way he'd watched 100 uncertain things approach in his life, with patience and with one hand free. The other vultures noticed too. Conversations dropped. A lighter snapped shut. Reno, the sergeant-at-arms, shifted his weight and angled his body so he could see the street behind the boy. Not because they expected trouble from a child, because men who'd survived certain things checked every angle of every approach, even when it was a kid in a torn t-shirt holding a school notebook. Eli stopped at the edge of the formation. He looked up at Titan the way you look up at a building, craning his neck, measuring the height, calculating whether what stood in front of him was something he could trust or something that would fall on him. "Sir?" The word came out cracked, dry throat, the kind of voice that hadn't had enough water today and maybe not yesterday either. Titan took a step forward. Then he did something the people watching from the gas station window would talk about for weeks. He knelt. Right there on the hot asphalt, gravel biting into his knee, bringing himself down to the boy's eye level. His leather cut creaked. His boots scraped. He rested one forearm across his thigh and waited. "What's your name, kid?" "Eli." "Eli. Okay. What do you need?" The boy's jaw worked. His eyes darted left. An involuntary check, the kind of reflex that doesn't belong on a child's face. He was looking for someone, or looking to make sure someone wasn't there. "Sir, how do you report a bad man?" The question landed like a rock in still water. Reno's hand came off his belt. Dutch, the club's road captain, set down his coffee. Somewhere behind them, a wrench stopped turning. Titan didn't move. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes recalibrated. A targeting system that had been dormant shifting back online. "Depends, kid." His voice was low, gravel and smoke. "What kind of bad man?" Eli's mouth opened, closed. His fingers crushed the edges of the notebook. When the answer came, it was barely above a whisper, and it carried the weight of something that had been locked inside a small body for far too long. "The kind who hurts my mom." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that has teeth. Titan's jaw tightened. One slow breath through his nose. He didn't reach for the boy. Didn't put a hand on his shoulder. He understood in the marrow of his bones that a child who flinched at sudden movements didn't need to be touched by a stranger. He needed to be heard by one. "How long?" Titan asked. "Since before my birthday, the one in March." 5 months. This kid had been carrying this for 5 months. "You tell anyone?" Eli nodded. "I told my teacher. She said she'd call someone. Nobody came." He swallowed. "I told the lady at the front desk at the police station. She wrote something down. Nobody came." His voice dropped. "I told my grandma on the phone. She said to pray and be a good boy." Titan closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, something had changed in the geometry of his face, something old and familiar and dangerous. "What's in the notebook, Eli?" The boy looked down at it, then slowly, like he was handing over the most valuable thing he owned, because he extended it toward Titan. "Everything." Titan took the notebook. He opened it carefully, the way you handle something fragile and important. The first page was written in a child's handwriting. Uneven letters, some words misspelled, but organized with a precision that made Titan's chest tighten. Dates, times, descriptions. Tuesday, April 8th. D came at 11 at night. Mom locked the bedroom. He broke the door handle. I hid in the closet. He threw the lamp. The next entry. Thursday, April 10th. Dee's truck was outside when I got home from school. Mom had a mark on her arm. She said she bumped the counter. Then, Saturday, April 13th, Dee took Mom's phone. She couldn't call nobody for 2 days, page after page, license plate numbers copied down in crooked numerals, a sketch of the truck, gray, dented fender, sticker on the bumper, names of people who came to the house with Derek, times they arrived, times they left, a list of things that were broken, lamp, door handle, kitchen chair, Mom's glasses, the lock on the bathroom. Titan turned the pages without speaking. Reno moved closer, read over his shoulder, and his face went the color of old concrete. This wasn't a child's diary. This was a case file, built by an 8-year-old who understood, in some gutted, instinctive way, that nobody was going to save his mother unless somebody had proof. So he made the proof himself. "Who's Dee?" Titan asked, though he already knew. Derek Voss." Eli said the name like it tasted bad. "He's not my dad. He used to be Mom's boyfriend. She told him to leave, but he won't. He says he owns the house. He doesn't. It's my grandpa's house. My grandpa died." "Where's your mom right now?" "Home. She doesn't know I'm here." Eli's eyes went wide suddenly, and real fear crept into them. Not the abstract fear of violence, but the immediate fear of a child who had done something he wasn't supposed to. "She told me not to talk to anyone about it. She's scared. If Derek finds out Hey." Titan's voice dropped even lower. Not soft. Titan didn't do soft. But steady. The way a wall is steady. Nobody's going to find out anything from us. You understand? Nothing you tell me leaves this parking lot unless you say so." Eli stared at him, searching, testing. Whatever he found in Titan's face must have been enough, because his shoulders dropped half an inch, and for the first time since he'd crossed the street, he exhaled. "She can't sleep," Eli said. "She puts the dresser in front of the bedroom door at night. She thinks I don't know." Titan handed the notebook back. Eli took it and pressed it against his chest again. Armor. "Reno." The sergeant-at-arms was already there. "I heard. Get me everything on Derek Voss. Everything. On it." Titan looked at the boy again. "Eli, I need you to go home. I need you to act like today was a normal Saturday. Can you do that?" "I've been acting like every day is normal for 5 months." The words landed like a blade. Titan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I bet you have." He watched the boy walk back across the street, small against the heat shimmer rising off the road, the notebook clutched like a shield. The gas station attendant inside the window pretended to be looking at something else. The whole town had been pretending to look at something else. Titan stood. His knees popped. The asphalt had left grit embedded in his jeans. He turned to the formation and didn't have to say a word. Every man there had heard enough. The charity ride was over before it started. Dutch pulled up beside him on a battered Road King. "What are we looking at?" 8-year-old kid documenting his mother's abuse because every adult in his life failed him. "Cops?" Kid went to the cops, went to his school, got nothing. Dutch's fingers tightened on his handlebars. He was 51, ex-Army, 3 combat tours, and he ran a youth boxing program out of his garage on weeknights. He didn't have children of his own. He had 100 of them. "So what are we doing?" Titan stared down the road where Eli had disappeared. "First, we find out who Derek Voss is. Then we find out what he's really doing. Then we make sure that kid never has to hide in a closet again." By 6 that evening, Reno had a file. Not a notebook, a real file. Derek Voss, 34. 3 prior arrests, assault, intimidation, violation of a protective order. All 3 dismissed. Witnesses recanted. Charges dropped. The pattern was textbook. The kind of predator who knew exactly how far he could push before the system required itself to act, and who understood that the system's threshold was pathetically, criminally high. But Reno found something else. Something that turned the file from a domestic violence jacket into something much worse. Voss was connected to a property management company called Ridgeline Holdings. On paper, Ridgeline bought distressed properties in low-income neighborhoods, foreclosures, estate sales, tax lien auctions. In practice, Ridgeline didn't wait for properties to become distressed. It made them distressed. Intimidation. Threats. Harassment campaigns targeting elderly homeowners, single mothers, anyone without the resources or the connections to fight back. Once the residents cracked, moved out, signed over, or simply disappeared, Ridgeline flipped the properties for 3 times their acquisition price. Rachel Mercer's house sat on a 1/4-acre lot on Sycamore Street. Her father had owned it outright. When he died, the house passed to Rachel. No mortgage, no liens, clean title. It was, in a town of collapsing property values, one of the few pieces of real estate worth anything, and it sat directly in the path of a redevelopment corridor that Ridgeline had been quietly assembling for 2 years. Derek Voss hadn't been Rachel's boyfriend. He'd been her assignment, sent to get close, sent to get control, sent to make her sign. Titan read the file in the back room of the Vulture's clubhouse, a converted machine shop on the industrial side of town where the walls were bare cinder block and the overhead lights buzzed like dying insects. He read it twice. Then he set it on the table and pressed both palms flat against the wood and breathed the way he breathed when the thing inside him, the thing that had kept him alive in 3 countries and 2 decades of bad decisions, started to wake up. "How many families?" he asked. Reno leaned against the door frame. "From what I can pull, at least 7 in the last 18 months, all the same profile, single parents, inherited property, no legal representation, no family support, and the county just lets it happen. County Assessor's Office has 3 Ridgeline donations on file. Planning Commission Chair's brother-in-law is listed as a Ridgeline consultant. Reno paused. It's not that they let it happen, Titan. They built the machine that makes it happen. Titan stared at the wall. Somewhere in the building, someone was working on a bike, the rhythmic clank of a socket wrench, the hiss of an air compressor. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The sounds of men fixing things because fixing things was what they did when the world handed them something broken. That kid, Titan said, that kid walked across a parking lot and asked a stranger for help because every single person who was supposed to protect him decided it wasn't their problem. His teacher, the cops, his own grandmother. He's 8 years old and he built a better case file than the county sheriff's department. I know. So what does that tell you? Reno didn't answer right away. He pulled a cigarette from behind his ear, looked at it, put it back. Tells me the system's not broken. It's working exactly the way someone designed it to work. Yeah, Titan straightened. And that means we can't fix it by working inside it. He picked up his phone and called the one person outside the club he trusted with something like this. Mara Sinclair, a legal aid attorney who operated out of a storefront office on the east end of town. Mara was 53, had survived a decade as a public defender in Philadelphia before burning out and landing in Blackridge to do the kind of law that didn't make money but occasionally made a difference. She answered on the second ring. Titan, I need you to look at something. It's Saturday. It's important. Silence. Then, it's always important with you. What is it? A property scheme targeting vulnerable families, at least 7 that we know of, connected to a guy named Derek Voss and a company called Ridgeline Holdings. Ridgeline? Mara's voice changed. The way a mechanic's voice changes when you describe a noise they've been hearing for months but couldn't locate. I've had 2 clients in the last year who lost properties to a company matching that description. I couldn't prove the connection. What do you have? A notebook full of evidence compiled by an 8-year-old boy. Long pause. I'm going to need you to repeat that. You heard me. Kid documented everything. Dates, plates, names, patterns. His mother's one of the targets. Voss has been living in the house, controlling her, waiting for her to break. Is she safe right now? For tonight. Voss isn't at the house. Eli said he comes and goes. But he's escalating. The kid's notebook shows the visits getting more frequent, the incidents getting worse. Titan, if what you're describing is real, this isn't just domestic violence. This is racketeering, conspiracy, potentially fraud on a scale that involves county officials. I know what it is. Then you know you can't ride in there with 20 bikes and a grudge. Mara, when have I ever done anything with just a grudge? She almost laughed. Almost. Get me copies of the notebook, every page. I'll start pulling property records tonight. And Titan, keep that boy safe. If Voss or anyone connected to Ridgeline finds out what that child has been doing, I know. He hung up. The machine shop was quiet now. The wrench had stopped. The compressor was silent. Titan walked out into the main room where 17 members of the Steel Vultures sat on mismatched chairs and leaned against grease-stained workbenches, waiting. He didn't give a speech. He never did. He laid out the facts the way a demolition expert lays out charges. Precise, sequential, designed to bring the right thing down. There's a kid on Sycamore Street, 8 years old. His mother's been targeted by a man connected to a property racket that's been stripping families across this town for 2 years. The cops know. The county knows. Nobody's moved. The kid came to us because he ran out of adults who gave a damn. He looked around the room. Reno, Dutch, a man they called Bishop who never spoke above a whisper and had 2 purple hearts in a drawer he never opened. Coyote, who'd done 6 years in Leavenworth for something he never discussed, and who now ran a free automotive repair clinic for single mothers. Harlow, the youngest, 26, who still woke up screaming 3 nights a week from things that happened in a place the government said he'd never been. Every one of them had been the kid in the parking lot once. Every one of them had stood in front of someone bigger, someone meaner, someone with more power, and asked for help that didn't come. Tomorrow morning, Titan said, we ride to Sycamore Street, not to touch Voss, not to threaten anyone. We ride so that Rachel Mercer and her son know they're not alone anymore. We ride so the neighbors see it. We ride so Ridgeline sees it. And then we start dismantling what these people built. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Chairs scraped. Boots hit the floor. Helmets came off hooks. The meeting was over because the decision had been made the moment an 8-year-old boy crossed a parking lot and trusted a stranger with the worst secret of his life. That night, Titan sat in the dark of his apartment above the shop. No lights, just the orange glow of the street lamp cutting through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor. He held a glass of bourbon he hadn't touched and stared at the wall where a photograph used to hang. A photograph he'd taken down 3 years ago because looking at it had stopped being grief and started being something sharper, something he didn't have a word for. His phone buzzed. A text from Reno. 2 words. "There's more." Titan set down the glass, opened the attachment. Reno had pulled county assessor records going back 5 years. Ridgeline Holdings wasn't 7 families. It was 19. 19 properties. 19 families pushed out, signed out, or scared out of homes they owned free and clear. And buried in the corporate filings behind 3 layers of LLCs and a registered agent in Delaware was a name that made Titan's blood go cold. A name connected to the county, connected to the police department, connected to the very system that was supposed to protect people like Rachel Mercer and her son. A name that explained why every report went nowhere, why every complaint was filed and forgotten, why an 8-year-old boy had to build his own case file because the adults who were paid to do it had been bought off before he was born. Titan stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then he stared at the dark. The bourbon sat untouched on the table. The street lamp hummed. Tomorrow, he would ride to Sycamore Street. Tomorrow, he would put 20 bikes between a frightened woman and the machine designed to devour her. Tomorrow, he would look Derek Voss in the eye and deliver a message without saying a single word. But tonight, sitting in the dark with a name burning in his phone, like a coal he couldn't put down, Titan understood something he hadn't wanted to understand. This wasn't a rescue. This was a war. And the enemy wore suits, carried badges, and had already made sure that every door between an 8-year-old boy and justice had been locked from the inside. The bikes hit Sycamore Street at 7:14 in the morning, 22 Harleys in staggered formation, the sound rolling between the houses like distant thunder dragged down to street level. It was Sunday. The neighborhood was still. Sprinklers ticked across brown lawns. A dog barked once from behind a chain-link fence and then went quiet, like even it understood that something had shifted in the geometry of the block. Titan rode point, Dutch on his left flank, Reno on his right. Behind them, the rest of the steel vultures filled the street in a column that stretched from the intersection all the way to the dead end, where the old railroad tracks cut through a wall of overgrown sumac. They didn't rev their engines. They didn't need to. The sound of 22 V-twins at idle was its own kind of language. Low, patient, absolute. Rachel Mercer's house was a small 2-story with white siding gone gray and a porch that sagged on the left side where the support post had rotted through. The lawn was cut, though. The flower boxes on the windows had marigolds in them, bright orange against the faded paint. Someone was trying. Someone was keeping things alive in a place designed to let them die. Titan killed his engine. The others followed one by one until the street held nothing but silence and the ticking of cooling metal. He didn't go to the door. He stood at the curb, helmet in one hand, and waited. Because you don't walk up to the house of a woman who's been terrorized by a man and knock on her door with 20 bikers behind you. You stand where she can see you. You let her decide. The curtain moved. A small face appeared in the downstairs window. Eli, eyes wide, mouth open. He disappeared. Muffled voices inside. Then the front door opened 6 inches, and Rachel Mercer looked out at the street like she was looking at a hallucination. She was 31, but looked older. Dark hair pulled back, no makeup, the kind of thinness that comes from forgetting to eat because your body's been running on cortisol for so long it doesn't remember what hunger feels like. She wore a long-sleeved shirt in July. Titan noticed. Every man on that street noticed. Nobody said a word about it. "Mrs. Mercer," Titan's voice carried just far enough to reach the porch. "My name's Mason Cross. I believe you've met my friend Eli." Rachel's hand tightened on the door frame. Behind her, Eli appeared at her hip, pressing against her side. He looked up at his mother, then back at Titan, and in his face was something that broke every man on that curb, hope fighting against the trained expectation of disappointment. "Eli." Rachel's voice was tight, controlled. The voice of a woman who had learned to keep every emotion at a volume that wouldn't provoke. "What did you do?" "I asked for help, Mom." The words hit her like a physical thing. Her eyes went glassy, her jaw locked. She stared at Titan across the dead lawn, and in that stare was every question she couldn't ask out loud. "Who are you? What do you want? Is this real? Is this safe? Or is this just another thing that's going to make it worse?" Titan held her gaze. He didn't smile, didn't try to look friendly. Friendly was a lie that men like Derek Voss told before they closed the door. Instead, he offered something rarer. He offered stillness. The kind of stillness that says, "I'm not moving, I'm not leaving, I have nowhere else to be." "Ma'am, I'm not here to cause you trouble. I know you've got enough of that. I'm here because your son asked a question, and he deserves an answer that isn't silence." Rachel looked at the bikes, at the leather, at the scars and the tattoos, and the men who stood beside their machines like sentinels carved from road dust and engine grease. Everything in her experience told her to close the door. Everything in her survival training, and 5 months with Derek Voss was its own kind of combat training, told her that strangers offering help were just threats wearing a different mask. But Eli's hand found hers, his small fingers wrapped around her wrist, and she looked down at her son, at the boy who had been carrying a notebook full of horrors so she wouldn't have to carry them alone. And something in her cracked. Not broke. Cracked. The way light gets into a dark room, through something damaged. She opened the door. The conversation happened on the porch. Rachel wouldn't let them inside. Not yet, maybe not ever. And Titan didn't ask. He sat on the top step with his back against the railing, and Rachel sat on the other side with Eli between them, and the rest of the vultures stayed at the curb, silent, forming a perimeter that wasn't a threat but a boundary. The message to the street was simple. Whatever happens on this porch is protected. Titan explained what they'd found. Not all of it. Not the name in the county records, not the scale of Ridgeline's operation. Just enough. That Derek Voss wasn't just an abusive ex, that the house was the target, that Rachel wasn't the first and wouldn't be the last. Rachel listened without moving. When he finished, she stared at the marigolds in the window box for a long time. "I knew," she said. "Part of me knew. He never cared about me. He showed up right after my father died, said all the right things, did all the right things, for about 3 weeks. She paused. Then the real Derek showed up, and by then he was already in the house. You tried to get him out?" "I called the police 4 times. First time, they talked to him on the porch and left. Second time, they didn't come at all. Third time, the officer told me it sounded like a communication issue and suggested couples counseling." Her voice went flat. Dead. The voice of someone reciting facts they've stopped feeling. Fourth time, Derek answered the door and told them I was having a mental health episode. They believed him. Titan's hands rested on his knees. His knuckles were white. "The system," Rachel started, then stopped, shook her head. "There is no system. There's just a bunch of people who've decided it's easier to look the other way." "Not anymore," Titan said. She looked at him, searching again the way Eli had searched. Mother and son, running the same algorithm. Is this person going to hurt me? Is this person going to disappear? Is this person real? "You don't know what he's connected to," Rachel said. "I'm starting to." "No, you're not." She leaned forward, and for the first time, something besides exhaustion moved across her face. Fear. Real, active, present tense fear. Derek has people, not just the ones who come to the house, people in offices, people with titles. He told me once, he was drunk, he probably doesn't remember saying it. He told me that even if I went to a judge, the judge would already know his name. Titan let that settle. He filed it next to the name on his phone, the name in the county records, the name that connected Ridgeline Holdings to the machinery of local government like a tumor connected to a blood supply. "That's why we're not going to a judge," he said. "Not yet." Rachel studied him. "Then what are you going to do?" "We're going to make sure you and Eli are safe. We're going to document everything Ridgeline has done, and we're going to build a case so solid that when it lands, it doesn't land in a local courtroom where Derek's friends sit behind the bench. It lands somewhere they can't reach." "Federal," Rachel said. not a question. Titan looked at her with a different kind of attention. You understand how this works. I watch the news. I'm trapped, not stupid. For the first time, something that might have been a smile ghosted across Titan's face. No, ma'am, you are not. They left Sycamore Street at 9. The ride back to the clubhouse was silent. No music from phone speakers wired to handlebars. No conversations shouted over the wind. Just the rumble of engines and the private weight of 22 men processing what they'd seen. A woman and a child living inside a machine designed to crush them slowly enough that nobody outside would hear the sound. At the clubhouse, the silence turned different, harder, charged. It started with Bishop. Bishop was the quietest member of the Steel Vultures. He communicated in nods, shrugs, and a whisper so low you had to lean in to hear it. He'd served as a combat medic in a war that officially never happened in a country whose name was still classified. He ran the club's informal medical operations, stitching cuts, setting bones, the kind of triage work that happened when you didn't ask hospitals questions and hospitals didn't ask you. He sat in the corner of the main room, his cut draped over the back of his chair, and he waited until the room was full before he spoke. We need to talk about what we're actually doing here. Titan was pouring coffee. Black, machine old enough to vote, grounds reused twice because nobody remembered to buy new ones. He set the pot down and turned. We're protecting a family. We're picking a fight with the county government. Bishop's whisper cut through the room like a blade through paper. That's not the same thing. It is when the county government is the one hurting the family. Titan. Bishop leaned forward. His elbows rested on his knees. His hands that had held dying men together in the dark, hung loose between them. I'm not questioning the cause. I'm questioning the plan. You pulled county records. You pulled corporate filings. You've got Mara working property chains. This isn't a charity ride. This is an investigation. And the last time this club ran an investigation, the room went cold. Everyone knew what Bishop meant. 4 years ago, the Steel Vultures had gotten involved in a dispute between a veteran's family and a predatory lender. Titan had pushed the club deeper than they should have gone. The lender's attorneys filed harassment charges. 3 Vultures spent a weekend in county lockup. The club's nonprofit status was challenged. Their charity partnerships, the food bank, the veterans shelter, the holiday toy drive, were frozen for 8 months while the legal mess untangled. It was Titan's worst mistake as president. He'd let anger override strategy, and the people who paid the price weren't him. They were the families the club served. He'd never forgiven himself for it. Everyone in the room knew that too. This isn't Grayson Financial, Titan said. His voice was steady, but the muscles in his jaw worked like something was trying to chew its way out. It has the same architecture. Bishop's whisper was merciless in its calm. Vulnerable family. Institutional villain. You walking point. The only difference is scale. This is bigger. Which means when it goes wrong, and something always goes wrong, it goes wronger. Dutch cleared his throat from the doorway. Bishop's not wrong. Titan's eyes cut to Dutch. Of all the men in the club, Dutch was the one whose judgment Titan weighted heaviest. Dutch had been his sergeant in Fallujah. They'd survived things together that had no language, and that shared survival had calcified into a trust so deep it functioned like a sixth sense. So when Dutch sided with Bishop, Titan felt it like a crack in the floor beneath his feet. I'm not saying we walk away, Dutch continued. He stood with his arms crossed, a posture that was less defensive than structural, holding himself together so the words came out right. I'm saying we need rules. We went off the rails with Grayson because there were no rules, no boundaries. You took it personal, Titan. You always take it personal. That's what makes you good at this, and that's what makes you dangerous. Reno, leaning against the far wall, said nothing. He watched. Reno always watched. It was what made him a perfect sergeant at arms. He saw the room the way a sniper sees terrain, measuring distances between people that had nothing to do with feet and inches. So what are you proposing? Titan asked. His voice was even, too even, the flatness of a man holding something volatile under pressure. Dutch unfolded his arms. Full club vote before any direct action. Every step gets discussed. No solo plays. No midnight rides to Sycamore Street because you couldn't sleep and wanted to check on the kid. This stays disciplined or it eats us. Agreed, Bishop whispered. Seconded, said Coyote from the back, his deep voice rumbling like an engine at idle. Titan looked around the room, 17 faces. Some nodded. Some just stared. But nobody objected to the conditions. They objected to nothing. They simply wanted guardrails around a man they knew was capable of driving off a cliff if someone he was protecting was standing at the bottom of it. Fine, Titan said. Full club vote. Every step. He paused. But the clock is ticking. Voss isn't sitting still. Ridgeline isn't sitting still. And that kid crossed a parking lot to ask a stranger for help because he ran out of options. I will not be another adult who lets him down. The room held, then Bishop nodded. Dutch uncrossed his arms, and the thing that had been building in the air, the crackling charge of a brotherhood testing its own seams, dissipated. Not resolved. Managed. There was a difference, and every man in the room understood it. Mara arrived at the clubhouse at 4 p.m. carrying 2 boxes of county records and an expression that could have etched glass. She spread the documents across the shop table. Deed transfers, LLC filings, tax assessor correspondence, permit applications, planning commission minutes. The paper trail was dense, layered, and deliberately obscured like someone had run it through a shredder and reassembled it in the wrong order on purpose. But Mara had spent 10 years as a public defender. She knew how to read the language of institutional corruption the way a mechanic reads engine noise, not by what's there, but by what's missing. 19 families, she said, all low income, all inherited properties, all approached by someone connected to Ridgeline within 6 months of the original owner's death. In 14 of the 19 cases, the family reported harassment, threats, or intimidation to local police. In every single case, the report went nowhere. She pointed to a column of dates on a spreadsheet she'd built. Here's what's interesting. In 9 of the 14 cases, the responding officer was the same person, Sergeant Dale Emmerich, Black Ridge PD. Reno leaned in. One cop handling 9 related cases and never connecting them? Or connecting them perfectly, Mara said, and getting paid to keep them disconnected. Titan stared at the name. Emmerich. He knew the man. Not well. Blackridge was small enough that everyone knew everyone at some functional level, but enough to place him. Mid-40s, stocky, drove a truck too nice for a sergeant's salary, coached Little League, went to every town council meeting, the kind of cop who showed up to community events and shook hands and smiled and made everyone feel like the system was working. It's not just Emmerich, Mara continued. She pulled a folder from the bottom of the stack. The name in the corporate filings, the one you found last night. Titan hadn't told the room about the name yet. He'd been waiting for confirmation, waiting for Mara to find the same thread independently so it couldn't be dismissed as paranoia or bias. She opened the folder and placed a single document on the table. A Delaware LLC registration for Ridgeline Holdings. 3 layers deep in the ownership structure, listed as a managing member with a 40% stake, was a name that every person in the room recognized. County Commissioner Gerald Hart, the man who oversaw the county budget, who approved police department funding, who signed off on planning commission decisions, who, 3 years ago, had stood at a podium at the Black Ridge Community Center and given a speech about protecting our town's most vulnerable residents from exploitation. The air left the room. Coyote was the first to speak. We're going after a county commissioner. We're exposing one, Mara corrected. There's a difference. Not to the county commissioner, there isn't. Titan picked up the LLC filing. His eyes moved over the words, but his mind was somewhere else. Somewhere in the space between what was right and what was survivable, the gap where every hard decision lived. Hart controls the police, he said, which means Emmerich doesn't just happen to catch these cases. He's assigned to them, which means every report Rachel filed, every call she made, every time that kid walked into a police station, the complaint went straight to the desk of a man who answers to the guy running the scam. That's the architecture, Mara said. And it's why this can't go to local courts. Hart's network touches the judicial appointments. The DA ran on a platform Hart funded. The circuit judge plays golf with him on Sundays. Federal? Dutch said. Federal, Mara confirmed. I have a contact at the DOJ regional office, a prosecutor named Wren who's been looking at county corruption cases across the state. But she needs evidence, not a child's notebook. That's compelling, but it's not prosecutable on its own. She needs financial records, communication trails, witness testimony. She needs enough weight that when she walks into a courtroom, the floor doesn't collapse under the case. Titan set down the document. He looked at the room, at the men who'd followed him into things that had no guaranteed exit, at Bishop, whose caution was its own kind of courage, at Dutch, whose loyalty came with conditions because unconditional loyalty was what got people killed, at Reno, who watched and measured and waited for the order that would set everything in motion. So we get it, Titan said. Mara raised her hand. Carefully, legally, nothing that can be suppressed, nothing that gives Hart's attorneys a procedural hook to throw the case out. Carefully, Titan repeated. The word tasted foreign in his mouth. I mean it, Titan. One mistake, one trespass, one confrontation that can be framed as intimidation, one phone call that crosses a line, and Hart buries this. He buries it, and then he comes for every person in this room. And for Rachel, Titan said. And for Eli. And for them, yes. Titan walked to the window. The parking lot outside was empty except for the bikes. The sun was going down, painting the sky the color of rust and old blood. Somewhere across town, an 8-year-old boy was sitting in a house with his mother, wondering if the men on the motorcycles would come back. Wondering if this time would be different from every other time an adult had made a promise and then walked away. Titan's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. A text from a number he didn't recognize. No words, just a photograph. It was Eli's house, taken from the street, shot from the angle of someone sitting in a parked car. The timestamp was 40 minutes ago. Someone had been watching Sycamore Street. Someone had seen the vultures arrive that morning. And someone wanted Titan to know they'd seen. He held up the phone. Reno was at his side in 2 steps, Dutch in 3. Mara went pale. Who sent this? Dutch asked. Unknown number. Burner, Reno said. He took the phone, studied the image, zoomed in on the edges. Shot from a vehicle, driver's side. Sedan, not a truck. You can see the mirror housing at the bottom edge. Dark color. Titan took the phone back. His thumb hovered over the screen. Every instinct screamed 2 things simultaneously. Ride to Sycamore Street right now, and that's exactly what they want you to do. Bishop appeared at his shoulder, looked at the photo, said nothing for 10 seconds. Then, in his devastating whisper, the clock just got faster. Yeah, Titan said. It did. He turned to the room. Every man was on his feet. The casual postures were gone. The coffee cups were forgotten. The air had changed the way air changes before a storm. Same molecules, different charge. Reno, I need 2 men on Sycamore Street tonight. Not on the block, nearby. Watching. Nobody moves. Nobody approaches. Nobody engages. Eyes only. Done. Dutch, call Mara's contact at DOJ first thing tomorrow. We're accelerating the timeline. Copy. Mara, everything you've got on Ridgeline, Emmerich, and Hart, I need it organized and ready to hand over within 48 hours. Mara nodded. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were not. Titan looked at the photo one more time. The house, the marigolds, the sagging porch, the window where a small face had appeared that morning, full of hope and terror in equal measure. Then he looked at the men around him. The men who'd voted for rules and boundaries and discipline. The men who were right to demand those things. The men who understood that the line between protection and destruction ran through the center of their own hearts. Nobody sleeps easy tonight, he said. But everybody sleeps knowing this. We don't quit. We don't scare. And we don't leave a kid and his mother standing alone against a machine that wants to eat them alive. The clubhouse emptied in silence. Engines turned over in the parking lot, one by one, headlights cutting across the cinder block walls. Titan stood at the door and watched them go. Dutch was the last to leave. He stopped his bike beside Titan and pulled off his helmet. You saw it, Dutch said. The photo? No. The way your hand shook when you looked at it. Titan said nothing. You see that kid and you see someone else. I know it. Bishop knows it. The whole club knows it. Dutch's voice was quiet, not accusing. The voice of a man who dragged his friend out of dark places before and recognized the terrain. Whatever happened, whoever you couldn't protect back then, this isn't that. This kid isn't a second chance at something you lost. He's a real person in a real situation, and he needs you thinking straight. Titan's jaw worked. His eyes stayed on the empty lot. Go home, Dutch. Titan, I hear you. I heard you. Go home. Dutch held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then he pulled his helmet on and rode into the dark. Titan stood alone in the doorway. The night air smelled like motor oil and cut grass, and something metallic underneath it. The scent of a town built on industry that had died decades ago and left its chemicals in the soil like a ghost. His phone buzzed again. Same unknown number, this time 2 words. Back off. He stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then he slid the phone into his pocket and walked inside and locked the door and sat in the dark the way he'd sat the night before. Alone, unmoving, holding something inside his chest that was half fury and half something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Not for himself. Titan had stopped being afraid for himself somewhere in the desert, in a place where fear was a luxury that got people killed. But fear for an 8-year-old boy who'd done the bravest thing Titan had ever seen. Braver than combat, braver than riding into gunfire, braver than anything these scarred and broken men had ever managed. Eli had asked for help. And now the people who made sure help never came knew the boy had found it. Titan opened the phone again. Not the messages, the photos. He scrolled back through his gallery, past bike shots and parts diagrams and screenshots of directions, to a folder he never opened. A folder with one photograph. A boy. Not Eli, younger, dark hair, a smile that belonged to a time before everything went wrong. He closed the folder, closed his eyes. Dutch was right. Dutch was always right. This wasn't that. This couldn't be that. But the weight felt the same. Outside, the wind picked up. A shutter banged somewhere down the block. The street lamp hummed its endless, indifferent hum. And on Sycamore Street, 2 steel vultures sat in a darkened pickup truck at the end of the block, watching a small house with marigolds in the window boxes and a light on in an upstairs room where a boy who had no more adults to trust was trying to sleep. At 2:17 in the morning, a dark sedan rolled slowly past the house. No headlights, windows tinted black. Reno's phone lit up. They were already here. The sedan made 3 passes. Reno counted them from the passenger seat of the pickup truck parked at the far end of Sycamore Street, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice so low it barely registered above the rain that had started falling at midnight and hadn't stopped since. Beside him, Harlow sat rigid behind the wheel, his hands locked at 10 and 2 on a truck that wasn't moving, his breathing the controlled 4-count rhythm that the VA therapist had taught him and that only worked about half the time. First pass at 2:17, Reno said into the phone. Second at 2:31, third at 2:44, 13-minute intervals, they're clocking the street, checking for surveillance. Titan's voice came back flat and hard. Did they stop? Negative, slow roll each time, no headlights, tinted windows. Can't make the plates, rain's too heavy, and they're running dirty. But it's the same vehicle, same speed, same pattern. Harlow, okay? Reno glanced at the younger man. Harlow's jaw was clenched so tight the tendons in his neck looked like bridge cables. His eyes hadn't blinked in 90 seconds. He was somewhere else. Somewhere with sand and noise and things that didn't have names in English. And it was taking everything in him to stay in the present tense. He's solid, Reno lied. Stay on the street until daylight. If the sedan comes back, get me a plate. Don't engage. Copy. Reno hung up. The rain hammered the roof of the truck like 1,000 small fists. He looked at Harlow. Hey. Nothing. Harlow. The younger man's eyes snapped to him, wild for a half second. Then the focus came back, layer by layer, like someone climbing out of a well. I'm good, Harlow said. I know you are. I said I'm good. And I said I know. Reno pulled the cigarette from behind his ear, looked at it. Put it back. You want to talk about it? No. Okay. They sat in the dark and watched the rain in the street and the small house where the light in the upstairs window had finally gone out. The sedan didn't come back, but it didn't matter. They both knew, the way soldiers know, the way hunted things know, that not coming back wasn't the same as being gone. By morning, the rain had turned Black Ridge gray. Not the gray of clouds, the gray of exhaustion, of a town that had been absorbing water into its cracks all night and now sat heavy and swollen and barely holding together. Gutters overflowed, storm drains backed up. The Milford Creek Bridge had 6 inches of standing water across its surface, and the fire department had set up cones that nobody paid attention to. Titan was at the clubhouse by 6. He hadn't slept. The bourbon from 2 nights ago still sat untouched on his kitchen table, a monument to discipline or stubbornness, or the simple fact that he didn't trust himself to start drinking when the thing inside him was this awake. He stood at the shop table, Mara's documents spread before him, and he traced the connections the way he'd once traced supply routes on a tactical map, looking for the junction point, the single node where all the lines converged. Ridgeline Holdings, Sergeant Emmerich, Commissioner Hart, Derek Voss. 19 families. And somewhere in the middle, an 8-year-old boy who'd done what the entire institutional apparatus of Black Ridge County had been paid to prevent. He'd created a record. Mara arrived at 7. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her hair was damp, her reading glasses smudged, and she carried a laptop bag over one shoulder and a document folder thick enough to stop a bullet. "I reached Wren," she said, setting the folder on the table without ceremony. "DOJ. She's interested but cautious. She wants to see the financial trail before she commits resources, and she made one thing very clear." Mara looked at Titan. "If this club does anything, just anything, that compromises the evidence chain, she walks. No second chance. No appeal. We know the rules." "Do you? Because at 2 in the morning, you had men parked on a surveilled street running counter-surveillance on an unknown vehicle. If Hart's people photograph your guys sitting in that truck, it gets framed as stalking, intimidation. And suddenly the narrative isn't motorcycle club protects family. It's outlaw gang harasses innocent citizens." Titan's hands pressed flat on the table. The wood creaked. "Those men were there because someone sent me a photograph of Eli's house. Someone was already watching. We were responding. I know that. You know that. But in a courtroom, the person with better attorneys gets to decide what the facts mean. And right now, Gerald Hart has better attorneys than we ever will." The door opened. Dutch walked in, rain-soaked, holding his phone like it was something that had bitten him. "We have a problem." Titan turned. Dutch's face, the face that had been steady through 3 combat tours and a decade of club chaos, was wrong. Not scared. Something worse. Confused. "I called the DOJ regional office this morning, asked for Prosecutor Wren, gave my name, said I was calling on behalf of Mara Sinclair regarding a county corruption matter." Dutch paused. His jaw worked. 30 minutes later, I got a call back, not from Wren, from the Black Ridge PD. The room went still. "Sergeant Dale Emmerich," Dutch continued, "called my personal cell. Asked me how my morning was going. Said he heard I'd been making some interesting phone calls and wanted to know if there was anything the department could help with." Mara's laptop bag slid off her shoulder. She caught it, but the gesture was automatic. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. "How fast?" Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How fast did that get back to Emmerich?" 30 minutes. I called DOJ at 7:12. Emmerich called me at 7:43. That's not possible through normal channels. Mara pulled off her glasses, wiped them on her shirt, put them back. Her hands were trembling, and she didn't bother hiding it. DOJ intake calls go through a screening process. They're logged internally. There's no mechanism for a local police sergeant to get flagged on an incoming tip within 30 minutes unless someone inside the DOJ office is feeding information back to Hart's network, Titan finished. The words landed like a detonation in a closed room. Everyone felt the concussion. Nobody moved. Dutch set his phone on the table. "It gets worse." "How does it get worse?" Emmerich's call wasn't a warning. It was friendly, conversational. He asked about the club, Asked about the charity ride, said he'd heard we were spending time on Sycamore Street and wanted to make sure everything was okay with the Mercer family. He used their name, Titan. He used Eli's name. Titan's right hand curled into a fist, slowly, like a machine engaging. He said, and I'm quoting, "We just want to make sure nobody's putting ideas in that kid's head. Kids that age, they make up stories. You know how it is." Then he laughed and hung up. Nobody spoke for 11 seconds. Reno counted them. Reno always counted. "He's telling us he knows," Reno said. "He's telling us he knows about Eli, about the notebook, about our involvement, and he's telling us he can reach us anytime he wants." "More than that," Mara said. She had pulled her laptop from the bag and was typing furiously, pulling records, cross-referencing something. "He's establishing a counter-narrative. If this goes public, Emmerich's already laid the groundwork. The boy makes up stories, the motorcycle club put ideas in his head, the mother is unstable. He's not just threatening us, he's pre-building the defense." Titan walked to the window. The rain streaked the glass in crooked lines. Outside, the parking lot was empty. The street was empty. The whole world felt empty, except for the weight of what was accumulating inside this room. "Who's the leak at DOJ?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Mara said, "but it limits our options dramatically. If Hart has someone inside the regional office, we can't use that channel. We'd need to go to a different jurisdiction, DC, maybe, or the state AG's office." "How long?" "Weeks, maybe months. These things don't move fast, Titan, especially when the target is a sitting county official with connections." "Rachel and Eli don't have months." "I know that." Titan turned from the window. His face had changed. The careful control, the discipline that Dutch and Bishop had demanded and he'd agreed to was still there, but underneath it, something was moving, something tectonic. "We need the financial records," he said, "not the public filings. The real ones. Ridgeline's internal documents, the money trail between Hart and the properties. If we can get that, we don't need DOJ to build the case. We hand them a finished package they can't refuse." Mara stopped typing. "And how do you propose to get internal financial records from a company controlled by a county commissioner? One of the 19 families. Someone who signed documents under duress. Someone who might have copies of what they signed. Someone who's angry enough to talk." Mara considered this. "It's possible. Some of the transfers would have required notarized signatures. If the families kept their copies, and if they're willing to come forward." "Find them," Titan said. "Start with the ones who lost the most." Mara closed her laptop. "I'll need help. Knocking on doors in neighborhoods where Ridgeline operates means being visible. Being visible means Emmerich knows." "So Emmerich knows." Titan's voice had an edge now that hadn't been there before. The edge of a man recalculating every assumption he'd been operating under. "He already knows. They all already know. The question isn't whether they see us. The question is whether we move faster than they do." The door to the back room opened, and Bishop walked in, and the room immediately went quiet in a different way. Bishop didn't just walk into rooms. He materialized, and when he materialized carrying a folder of his own, it meant he'd been working a thread nobody had asked him to pull. He set the folder on the table without a word, opened it to a printout of a property record. 814 Sycamore Street, he whispered. "Rachel Mercer's house. I pulled the title chain going back 40 years. His finger traced a line on the document. "The property was originally purchased by Thomas Mercer, Rachel's father, in 1986. Clean title. No liens, no encumbrances. Thomas Mercer died 14 months ago. The will was filed in probate court and the house transferred to Rachel." He turned the page. "Here's where it gets bad. Another document, a lien filing, dated 3 months ago. Someone filed a mechanic's lien against the property, claims of unpaid renovation work totaling $62,000. The contractor listed is Blackstone Property Services, which is a Ridgeline subsidiary," Mara said, leaning over the document. "I've seen this name in 6 other files." "The renovation work never happened," Bishop whispered. "I drove past that house this morning. There's no evidence of recent renovation. No permits on file, no building inspection records. But the lien is filed, which means if Rachel doesn't contest it within the statutory window, Blackstone can force a sale. How long is the window? Titan asked. 60 days from filing. The lien was filed May 12th. Titan did the math. His stomach dropped. That's 17 days from now. 16, Bishop corrected. Courts closed on weekends. The room absorbed this like a body absorbs a blow. First the impact, then the pain, then the realization of what's damaged. She doesn't know, Titan said. Rachel doesn't know about the lien. Almost certainly not. Lien notices are sent to the property address. Derek Voss is at the property. He's intercepting her mail. He's been intercepting everything, Reno said. Phone, mail, that's in the kid's notebook. Eli documented it. Titan picked up the lien filing and read it again. The legal language was dense, deliberate, designed to obscure. But the mechanism was simple. File a fraudulent lien. Intercept the notice. Wait for the clock to expire. Force a sale. Buy the property through a shell company at a fraction of its value. Repeat 19 times across a county where nobody was watching because the people who were supposed to watch were running the operation. We need to tell Rachel, Titan said. We need to do more than tell her, Mara said. We need to file a lien contest. We need to file it before the window closes. And we need Rachel's cooperation to do it, which means we need her to trust us enough to sign legal documents with the motorcycle club's attorney. She'll trust us. Will she? You met her once, on a porch, for 20 minutes. And since then, her street's been surveilled, her son's name has been used by a corrupt cop, and nobody's told her any of it. The accusation hung in the air. Titan absorbed it. She was right. They'd been so focused on building the case, on the architecture of the conspiracy, that they'd left Rachel in the dark. They'd done what every institution before them had done, made decisions about her life without including her in the conversation. I'll go today, Titan said. Not alone, Dutch said. Alone. One man on a porch is a conversation. 20 bikes on a street is a spectacle. After what Emmerich said on the phone, we can't afford spectacles. Dutch started to object. Titan cut him off with a look that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with the specific kind of stubbornness that had kept him alive in places where stubbornness was the only currency that mattered. I'll go alone. I'll tell her everything. The lien, ridgeline, heart, Emmerich, all of it. She deserves to know what she's standing in the middle of. And if Voss is there, Reno asked, then I'll have a conversation with Voss. Titan. I said a conversation. His eyes were flat, frozen water. Nobody said it would be a pleasant one. He rode to Sycamore Street at noon. The rain had softened to a mist that hung in the air like something the town was exhaling. His softail cut through it alone. No formation, no escort, no rumbling announcement. Just one man on one machine. The engines idle, a low murmur against the wet street. He parked at the curb, removed his helmet. The house looked different in the rain, smaller. The marigolds in the window boxes had their heads bowed from the water. The porch sagged a little deeper. The whole structure seemed to be carrying weight it wasn't built to hold. Titan walked up the path and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. The front door opened before he knocked. Rachel stood behind the screen, arms crossed, wearing the same long sleeves. Eli wasn't with her. He's at a friend's house, she said, answering the question Titan hadn't asked. I sent him there after the car. Titan's focus sharpened. What car? The one that drove past my house 3 times in the middle of the night. You think I don't hear things? You think I sleep? She pushed the screen door open. Not an invitation, a challenge. I also know you had people parked at the end of my street. A truck. 2 men. Don't insult me by denying it. Titan didn't deny it. I told you I'd keep you informed, he said. I haven't done that well enough. That's on me. Damn right it's on you. Rachel stepped onto the porch. The mist caught in her hair. Up close, Titan could see what the distance had hidden. The dark circles under her eyes weren't just fatigue. They were bruises, faded to yellow-green, layered over older bruises that had faded to nothing. A history written on skin. You showed up with your bikes and your big promises, and then you disappeared for 2 days while people I've never seen before started circling my block. Do you have any idea what that feels like? Do you know what it's like to wonder if the people who said they'd help are actually making it worse? Yes, Titan said. I do. Something in his voice stopped her. Not the word, the weight behind it. The specific gravity of a man who knew exactly what it felt like to trust someone and watch that trust turn into a weapon. Rachel stared at him. The anger didn't leave her face, but something else moved behind it. Recognition. The recognition of damage, seeing damage. "Then talk to me," she said. "Tell me what's actually happening." He told her. All of it. Standing on that sagging porch in the mist, with his boots leaving wet prints on the wood and his leather darkening with rain, he laid out every piece of it. Ridgeline, Hart, Emmerich, the 19 families, the lien on her house, the DOJ leak, the photograph on his phone, the sedan on her street. Rachel didn't interrupt. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp or shake her head or do any of the things that people in movies do when they learn the world is worse than they thought. She listened the way a woman who had survived 5 months of daily terror listens, with total attention and zero surprise. Because when you've been living inside a nightmare, learning the nightmare is bigger than you thought doesn't change the texture of it. It just extends the walls. When Titan finished, Rachel was quiet for a long time. The mist thickened. A car passed on the cross street, its tires hissing on the wet asphalt. 16 days, she said. 16 days. And if I don't contest the lien? They force a sale. Blackstone buys the house. You and Eli end up with nothing. Rachel's hands gripped the porch railing. Her knuckles went white. Not from fear. From the slow building pressure of rage held at a temperature just below the point where it becomes something you can't control. "My father built that porch railing," she said. "The one you're standing next to. He built it when I was 12. He cut every board himself, sanded it, sealed it." She looked at her hands on the wood. "It's rotting now. I can feel it give when I lean on it, but I can't fix it because Derek controls the money, and the mail, and the phone, and every single thing that connects me to the world outside this house." "Not anymore?" "You keep saying that." Her eyes found his, fierce, tired, burning. "Prove it." Titan pulled the lien filing from inside his cut. Mara had prepared a contest form. He unfolded it on the railing between them. "This is a legal contest to the lien. Mara Sinclair, she's the attorney working with us, drafted it. If you sign it, we file it tomorrow. It doesn't solve everything, but it stops the clock." Rachel looked at the document. She read it carefully, every word, every clause, and Titan understood something about her that he hadn't fully grasped before. Rachel Mercer wasn't a victim. She'd been placed in a position designed to create victims, and she'd survived it. And the distance between those two things was the distance between a person and a circumstance. She was not what had happened to her. "I'll sign it," she said, "but I have a condition." "Name it." "You stop making decisions about my life without talking to me first. I'm not a package you're delivering somewhere safe. I'm a person. I'm Eli's mother, and I need to be in the room when the room is deciding what happens to us." Titan nodded, once. Slow. The nod of a man who recognized a command structure when he heard one. "Agreed." She signed the document. Her signature was sharp, angular, the handwriting of someone who hadn't lost their precision even when they'd lost everything else. Titan folded the paper and slid it back inside his cut. He turned to go. "Mason." He stopped. She'd used his first name. Nobody outside the club used his first name. "The photograph on your phone, the one of my house." Rachel's voice was low, controlled, but underneath the control something vibrated. "I need you to understand something. If they know about Eli's notebook, if Derek finds out what my son has been doing, he won't just take the house." She paused. The mist turned to rain. "He'll take my son." The words hung in the wet air between them. "He's threatened it before. Told me he has friends in family services. Told me one phone call and they'd declare me unfit and Eli would go into the system. I never knew if it was true." She stopped. Breathed. "Now I think maybe it is." Titan stood on the porch steps with the rain running down the creases of his leather and the weight of everything he'd just heard settling into the part of his chest where the old damage lived. The part where a photograph of a dark-haired boy lived in a folder he never opened. "Nobody is taking your son," he said. The words came out with a certainty that surprised even him. Not loud, not theatrical. The quiet certainty of a man drawing a line in wet concrete that would harden into something permanent. Not Voss, not Emmerich, not the county, not anyone. Rachel searched his face one more time. Whatever she found there, whatever calculus of damage and determination and barely controlled fury, she read in the geometry of his scars and the frozen water of his eyes. It was enough. She went inside. Titan rode back to the clubhouse in the rain. The streets were empty. The town was drowning in slow motion, not in water, but in the accumulated weight of corruption so deeply embedded in its infrastructure that it had become invisible, like rebar inside concrete. You couldn't see it, but it held the shape of everything. His phone rang. Mara. "Don't go to the clubhouse," she said. "Why?" "Because I just got a call from one of the other families. The Delgados. They were Ridgeline's third target, lost their house on Porter Avenue 18 months ago. The husband, Miguel, has been trying to get someone to listen to him for over a year. And he just told me something that changes everything." Titan pulled over. The rain hammered his shoulders. His bike idled beneath him, vibrating. Miguel Delgado kept copies of every document Ridgeline made him sign. Every single one. But that's not the thing that changes everything. Mara's voice had a quality Titan had never heard in it before. Not fear, something adjacent to fear. The sound of someone standing at the edge of a discovery that rearranges the landscape. The notary on the Delgado documents. The same notary appears on at least 8 of the 19 transfers. Her name is Karen Voss. Titan's hand tightened on the phone. Voss. Derek Voss's mother. She's a licensed notary public in the county, and she's been notarizing fraudulent property documents for Ridgeline Holdings for at least 3 years. Titan's engine idled. The rain fell. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. "It's a family operation," Titan said. "It's deeper than that." Karen Voss also serves on the county zoning board. She votes on the rezoning applications that increase the value of the properties after Ridgeline acquires them. She notarizes the fraudulent documents, and then she votes to approve the rezoning that makes those documents profitable. And nobody connected her to Derek? Different last names in the public records. She remarried, goes by Karen Pruitt professionally. I only found the connection because Miguel Delgado remembered her face and her son picked her up from the signing in his gray truck. Mara paused. The gray truck with the dented fender. The one in Eli's notebook. Titan closed his eyes. The rain ran into them and he didn't care. The picture was complete now, not just a conspiracy, a machine, built from family connections, government positions, police protection, and the systematic exploitation of people too vulnerable to fight back. Derek Voss wasn't just an enforcer, he was a legacy. Born into a system designed to consume, trained in its methods, carrying its tools in his blood. Mara. Yeah. Get the Delgado documents, get Miguel's testimony, and get Ren on the phone, not through the regional office. Find her personal number. Go through bar association records, law school contacts, anything. We bypassed the leak entirely. I'm already working on it. And Mara, the lien contest. Rachel signed it. I need it filed tomorrow morning. It'll be filed by 9. He hung up. Sat on his bike in the rain on a dead street in a dead town and felt the architecture of the fight rearrange itself around him. This was no longer a matter of protecting one family. This was the thread that, pulled correctly, would unravel the entire garment. Karen Voss, the notarizations, the zoning votes, the financial trail from fraudulent liens to rezoned properties to profit, all of it documented, all of it traceable, all of it leading back to Gerald Hart's desk. But the discovery cut both ways. If Titan could see the full picture now, then the people in the picture could see him too, and they weren't going to wait for a federal prosecutor to come knocking. They were going to move first. They always moved first. That was the advantage of building a machine. You controlled the timing. His phone buzzed. Text from Reno. Emmerich just pulled over Coyote on Route 9. No violation. Ran his plates. Searched his saddlebags. Took his time. Let him go with a smile. Another buzz. Another text. Harlow's landlord called. Says he needs to inspect the unit. First time in 3 years. Another. Dutch's ex-wife just got a visit from a woman asking about his involvement with a gang. Woman didn't leave a card. Titan read each message. His face didn't change. His breathing didn't change. But something inside him, the thing that had been sleeping for years, the thing that combat had built and discipline had caged, opened its eyes all the way. They were squeezing. Not the club directly. Too obvious. Too litigable. They were squeezing the edges. The personal lives. The pressure points. The landlords and ex-wives and traffic stops that say, "We know where you live. We know who you love. We know every soft place on your body." It was the same playbook they ran on the 19 families. The same slow, systemic constriction. And it was happening to the steel vultures now. Titan rode to the clubhouse. The lot was full, every member present. The room smelled like wet leather and coffee, and the particular ozone charge of men who were afraid and angry in equal measure and didn't know which one to let out first. He walked in and didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table and placed his phone in the center, screen up, messages visible. They're coming after us individually. Emmerich on the road. Pressure on homes, harassment of families, the same model they use on their targets. Nobody spoke. We have 16 days before Rachel Mercer loses her house. We have a witness, Miguel Delgado, with documents that connect Ridgeline to fraudulent notarizations performed by Derek Voss's mother, who sits on the county zoning board. We have a federal prosecutor who may or may not have a leak in her office. And we have a county commissioner who just declared war on this club without saying a word. He looked around the room, at the scars and the ink and the eyes that had seen worse things in worse places but had never seen anything quite like this. A fight where the enemy wore the uniform of the system they'd all been taught to trust. "If anyone wants out," Titan said, "this is the time. No judgment, no shame. You walk out that door and you're still a vulture, but what comes next is going to cost. It's going to cost time and money and sleep, and maybe more than that. And I won't lie about what we're facing." Silence. Rain on the roof. An engine idling somewhere outside. Someone who hadn't killed their bike yet, as if keeping it running was a way of keeping the option open. Then Bishop stood. The quietest man in the room, rising from his corner chair like something geological shifting. "I spent 6 years in places where the people in power used the system to destroy the people without it," he whispered. "I watched it happen. I filed reports. I followed orders. I did what I was told." He paused. His hands hung at his sides, the hands that had held dying men. "I'm done watching." He sat down. Coyote leaned forward. "I did 6 years in Leavenworth because I put my hands on a man who was hurting a kid. I paid the price. I'd pay it again." Dutch nodded. "Once. That was enough." And around the room, one by one, without speeches or gestures, every member of the Steel Vultures made the same choice. Not with words, with stillness, with the absence of movement toward the door. Titan picked up his phone. "Then we move. Tonight. Mara's getting the Delgado documents. I need 2 teams, one to help her collect testimony from every family willing to talk. One to build a digital copy of every record we have, every document, every photograph, every page of Eli's notebook, and store it somewhere Hart can't reach." The engine outside finally cut. The door opened, boots on concrete. The last holdout, whoever they were, had made their decision. The rain fell harder. The clubhouse hummed with purpose. And in the back of Titan's mind, underneath the planning and the logistics and the cold machinery of strategy, a single image persisted. An 8-year-old boy's handwriting in a crumpled notebook, documenting the destruction of his world with the precision of someone who understood that truth, written down and kept safe, was the only weapon he had. Titan understood. Because he was building the same weapon now. Just bigger, just louder, just aimed at something that had never expected anyone to aim back. His phone buzzed one final time. Unknown number, same as before. Not words this time. A photograph. Eli, walking into his friend's house that afternoon, backpack over one shoulder, notebook visible in the side pocket. They'd been following the boy. They knew about the notebook. And somewhere in the machinery of Blackridge County, someone had just decided that an 8-year-old child with a spiral notebook full of truth was a threat that needed to be eliminated. Titan didn't breathe for 4 seconds after he saw the photograph. 4 seconds is nothing. 4 seconds is the space between one heartbeat and the next. But in those 4 seconds, every decision Mason Cross had ever made, every calculated risk, every controlled response, every act of discipline that kept the animal inside him leashed, compressed into a single point of white-hot clarity. They had photographed Eli. They had followed a child. They had aimed a camera at an 8-year-old boy's backpack and captured the outline of the notebook that was the only thing standing between 19 families and oblivion. He held the phone so tight, the screen cracked under his thumb. Titan. Reno's voice. Close. Steady. The voice of a man who recognized the specific silence that preceded the most dangerous version of his president. Talk to me. Titan turned the phone around. Reno looked at the image. His face didn't change, but his hand moved to his belt. An unconscious gesture, muscle memory from a life where threats were answered with immediate action. Where was this taken? Reno asked. The Holloway house, Maple Street. That's where Rachel sent Eli this afternoon. They know the kid's location in real time. They've been tracking the family, probably since we showed up on Sycamore Street, maybe before. Dutch appeared at Titan's shoulder. He looked at the phone. The color left his face in a single wave, like water draining from a sink. We move him, Dutch said. Right now. Tonight. We move the kid and Rachel both. Where? Titan's voice was a blade. Where do you move a woman and child in a town where the police chief answers to the man who's hunting them? Where is safe when the people who decide what's safe are the ones making it dangerous? The clubhouse went quiet. 20 men stood in a room that smelled of wet leather and old coffee and the metallic edge of adrenaline, and not one of them had an answer. Because the answer required something none of them had, a place outside the reach of Gerald Hart's machinery. Then Mara called. Titan answered on speaker. Her voice was ragged, breathless, the voice of someone who'd been running, not physically, but through documents and phone calls and the labyrinth of legal architecture that protected people like Hart from people like them. I found Wren, the federal prosecutor, not through the regional office, through a law school classmate who clerked with her 10 years ago. I have her personal cell. I called her 20 minutes ago. And? She already knows about Blackridge. She's been building a parallel investigation for 6 months. Rural Corruption Task Force. She has Hart on her radar, but she doesn't have enough for a warrant. She needs financial documents. She needs witness testimony. And she needs it within the next 72 hours because there's a judicial review panel meeting on Thursday that could either greenlight her investigation or shut it down. 72 hours. That's the window. If we can deliver the Delgado documents, Rachel's lien contest, Eli's notebook copies, and testimony from at least 3 other families by Wednesday night, Wren says she can present to the panel Thursday morning. Titan closed his eyes. 72 hours. 3 days to dismantle a machine that had been running for years, built by people who had spent decades learning how to make themselves untouchable. There's more, Mara said. Her voice dropped. Wren told me something about the leak. It's not in her office, it's in the intake system. The DOJ regional office uses a shared database for incoming tips. Anyone with access credentials can see new entries. And guess who was appointed to the Regional Community Liaison Board last year? A position that comes with database access? Hart. Hart's chief of staff. A man named Leonard Foyle. He's been monitoring the intake system for any mention of Blackridge, Ridgeline, or related keywords. That's how Emmerich knew about Dutch's call within 30 minutes. Foyle flagged it and passed it down the chain. So we bypassed the database entirely. That's what Wren said. She gave me a direct submission protocol. Physical documents, hand-delivered, to her office in Pittsburgh. No digital trail, no database entry, nothing Foyle can intercept. Pittsburgh's 4 hours. 3.5 if you don't stop. Titan opened his eyes. The room was watching him. Every face, every scar, every pair of eyes that had seen the worst of what humans could do to each other and had chosen, despite everything, to be the kind of men who rode toward the fire instead of away from it. Reno, get to the Holloway house, pick up Eli, bring him and Rachel to the clubhouse. Don't call ahead. We don't know if their phones are monitored. Moving. Dutch. Call Miguel Delgado. Tell him we need his documents tonight. Every page, every signature. Tell him we have a federal prosecutor ready to act, but the window is 72 hours. On it. Bishop, I need you to photograph every page of Eli's notebook. High resolution. Multiple copies. Store them on 3 separate devices and give one to Mara. Bishop was already reaching for his bag. Coyote Harlow. I need you to reach the other families on Mara's list, the ones who lost properties. We need 3, minimum 3, willing to provide testimony. Written statements, signed and dated. You have until tomorrow night. Coyote nodded. Harlow's jaw was set, but his eyes were clear, present. The ghost that haunted him had retreated behind the urgency of something that mattered right now, in this world, to real people. What about Emmerich? Dutch asked from the doorway, phone already in his hand. He's going to notice activity, traffic stops, surveillance. He's going to squeeze. Let him squeeze. Titan's voice had changed, not louder, harder. The voice of a man who had stopped calculating risk and started calculating trajectory. Every move Emmerich makes is another data point for Wren's investigation. Every traffic stop, every harassment call, every intimidation visit, it's all pattern evidence. He thinks he's pressuring us. He's building our case. The room moved. Boots on concrete, engines turning over in the parking lot, phones lighting up in the dark. The clubhouse emptied with the organized urgency of men who had done this before. Not this specific thing, but the act of mobilizing under pressure, of converting fear into function, of running toward the thing that everyone else ran from. Titan stood alone in the empty room for 30 seconds. He looked at the phone, at the photograph of Eli walking into a house, unaware that a camera was aimed at his back, unaware that the notebook in his backpack had made him a target in a war he didn't know he was fighting. He put the phone down, picked up his helmet, walked out into the rain. Reno brought Rachel and Eli to the clubhouse at 9:14. Rachel came through the door carrying a duffel bag in one hand and her son's hand in the other, and her face held the expression of a woman who had been lifted out of one nightmare and set down inside another. Different walls, different smells, but the same fundamental disorientation of not knowing if the ground beneath her was solid. Eli looked around the shop with wide eyes. The cinder block walls, the workbenches covered in tools and parts and grease-stained manuals, the row of helmets on hooks, the smell of motor oil and coffee and leather that permeated everything like a second atmosphere. "Cool," he whispered. Rachel didn't smile. She looked at Titan. "How long?" "A few days, until we can get the evidence to the federal prosecutor. And then? And then either the machine breaks or it doesn't." That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be honest. Rachel held his gaze. Then she set down the duffel bag and looked around the room, at the mismatched chairs and the coffee machine and the bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling. "Where does my son sleep?" Bishop materialized from the back. He'd already prepared the room, the small office behind the shop that the club used for storage. He'd cleared the boxes, laid down a sleeping pad, found clean blankets from somewhere. A bottle of water sat on the overturned crate that served as a nightstand, next to a flashlight and a paperback book. A Western, dog-eared, the only reading material in the clubhouse that was appropriate for a child. Rachel looked at the room, at the sleeping pad, at the water and the flashlight, at the care that had gone into preparing a space for a child in a building made of cinder block and engine grease. Her jaw tightened, her eyes went bright. "Thank you," she said. 2 words, but she said them to Bishop, and Bishop, who had seen children sleep in worse places in countries without names, simply nodded and disappeared. By midnight, the clubhouse had become a command center. Mara spread the Delgado documents across the shop table. Notarized property transfers, fraudulent lien filings, receipts for renovation work that was never performed. Each document bore the notary stamp of Karen Pruitt, Karen Voss, in careful blue ink, a signature that connected Derek Voss's mother to every fraudulent transaction Ridgeline had executed. Miguel Delgado himself sat in a folding chair by the door, a stocky man in his 50s with mechanic's hands and the haunted eyes of someone who had lost his home and spent 18 months being told it was his own fault. He'd brought everything, every paper, every receipt, every note he'd written to himself in the margins of documents he didn't understand, trying to figure out how the house his parents had left him had been stolen from under his feet by people wearing suits and carrying briefcases. "I went to the police," Miguel said. His voice was flat, exhausted. The voice of a man recounting a story he'd told so many times it had worn smooth, like a stone in a river. 3 times. The first time they said it was a civil matter. The second time, they said I should hire a lawyer. The third time, the officer, Emmerich, he told me that if I kept making complaints, they'd look into whether my immigration status was current. He paused. I was born in Allentown. My family's been in Pennsylvania for 4 generations. Titan listened. He stood with his back against the wall, arms crossed, his face revealing nothing and containing everything. Did Emmerich know your status when he said that? Mara asked, her pen moving across a legal pad. He didn't care. He said it to scare me. And it worked. Miguel's hands twisted in his lap. I stopped going. I stopped calling. I let them take my house because I was afraid of what they'd take next. Coyote and Harlow returned at 1 in the morning. They had 3 families, 3 written statements, 3 signed testimonies from people who had lost their homes to Ridgeline's operation and had been silenced by fear, indifference, or the deliberate weaponization of a system that was supposed to protect them. The Garcias on Elm Street, a widow who'd lost her husband's house 3 months after his death, when a man she'd never met showed up claiming unpaid contractor debts. The Robinsons on Oak Avenue, an elderly couple who'd signed transfer documents they didn't understand after a woman identifying herself as a county housing specialist told them they'd lose their property tax exemption if they didn't. And the Petersons on the north side, a single father with 2 kids who'd come home one day to find the locks changed and a notice on the door from Blackstone Property Services claiming ownership through a tax lien sale that had never been publicly announced. 3 families, 3 stories, 3 pieces of a pattern so consistent it was practically a blueprint. Mara organized the documents into a binder. Testimony, financial records, property chains, notary stamps, zoning board minutes showing Karen Pruitt voting to rezone properties that Ridgeline had acquired through fraud. A timeline that connected every piece to every other piece with the precision of an engineering diagram. This is it, she said at 2 in the morning, her voice hoarse, her hands shaking from coffee and adrenaline and the particular exhaustion of someone who had been building a weapon out of paper and truth for 18 hours straight. This is enough. If Wren presents this to the panel on Thursday, they'll authorize the investigation, subpoena power, asset freezes, the whole apparatus. If we get it to Pittsburgh in time, Titan said. If we get it there. The plan was simple. Titan would ride to Pittsburgh with the documents. Physical delivery. No digital trail. 3.5 hours each way. He'd leave at dawn, deliver the binder to Wren's office, and be back by evening. Simple plans are the ones that break first. At 4 in the morning, Harlow came through the door at a run. Car on the street, 2 cars, parked at both ends of the block. Titan was on his feet before the sentence finished. He moved to the window, not in front of it, beside it, angling his line of sight through the gap between the frame and the wall. The rain had stopped. The street was wet and black and glistened under the sodium lamps like something alive. 2 vehicles, dark sedans. One at the north end of the block, one at the south, engines running, lights off, windows dark. They found the clubhouse, Dutch said. They always knew where the clubhouse was, Titan said. They're here because we moved Rachel and Eli. Someone saw, someone reported, and now they're establishing presence. Are they going to come in? No, they're not cops. They're Ridgeline's people, private, no authority to enter. They're here to watch, to log who comes and goes, to photograph license plates and faces, and to make damn sure we know we're being watched. So what do we do? Titan turned from the window. He looked at the binder on the table. 300 pages of evidence, 72 hours. A federal prosecutor waiting in Pittsburgh, and 2 sedans outside the door watching for exactly the move he needed to make. They're expecting me to ride out of here with the documents, he said. They don't know what's in the binder. They don't know about Wren. But they know we've been gathering something, and they know I'm the one who carries it. Decoy, Reno said. Decoy. The plan changed. At 5:30, with the first gray light of morning seeping through the clouds, 11 steel vultures mounted their bikes in the parking lot, Titan among them. The binder was in his saddlebag, visible, obvious, exactly where someone watching would expect it to be. They rode out of the lot in formation. The sedans followed. One peeled off behind the column. The other circled around to a parallel street, tracking the formation's trajectory through the grid of Black Ridge's industrial district. 6 blocks from the clubhouse, the formation split. Titan and 5 riders turned east toward the highway. The sedans followed the eastbound group. The westbound group, Dutch, Coyote, and 4 others, continued 3 blocks, turned south, and rendezvoused at a gas station on Route 9 where Mara was waiting in her car with the real binder. The binder in Titan's saddlebag was empty. 300 pages of blank paper. Dutch transferred the real documents to Mara's car. She pulled onto Route 9 heading west, away from Pittsburgh, away from the highway the sedans were watching, and took the back roads through the mountain passes that wound through the Alleghenies like stitches in old leather. Meanwhile, Titan rode east. Let them follow. Let them track. Let them spend the entire morning chasing a man carrying nothing while a 53-year-old legal aid attorney and a 12-year-old Honda drove the evidence that would destroy their operation through mountain roads they'd never think to watch. The sedans followed Titan for 47 minutes. He rode the highway at exactly the speed limit, checking his mirrors, counting the distance. Then, at a truck stop outside of Somerset, he pulled over, parked, walked inside, bought coffee, sat at a booth by the window and drank it slowly, watching the sedans idle in the parking lot like predators who'd followed a scent to a dead end and didn't understand why. His phone rang. Mara, I'm through the pass, 90 minutes from Pittsburgh. Any tales? Nothing. The roads are empty. Call me when you're there. He hung up, drank his coffee. The waitress refilled it without asking. Outside, one of the sedan's drivers got out, a thick man in a dark jacket, face shadowed, and leaned against the hood, arms crossed, staring at the truck stop window. Not hiding, not pretending, just standing there in the morning light, making sure Titan knew he was seen. Titan raised his coffee cup. A salute, a taunt, a message. You followed the wrong man. He finished the coffee, paid, walked out into the parking lot, and mounted his bike with the slow deliberation of a man who had nowhere to be and all the time in the world. The sedan driver watched him. Titan met his eyes, held them, and in that 3-second exchange, entire conversations happened without words. I know who you work for. I know what you've done. And I know something you don't. The paper trail that's going to bury you is already halfway to Pittsburgh in the trunk of a Honda you never saw. Titan kicked the Softail to life, pulled out of the lot, headed east for another 15 minutes, letting the sedans commit to the direction, burning their time, burning their fuel, burning the attention of men who were paid to watch, while the thing they should have been watching slipped through their fingers 60 miles to the west. Then he took an exit, circled back, hit the back roads himself, rode toward Pittsburgh from the south while the sedans hunted for him on the eastbound highway like dogs chasing a thrown stick. Mara reached Pittsburgh at 11:40. She called from the parking garage of the federal building, her voice shaking, not with fear anymore, but with the vibrating energy of someone who had crossed a finish line they weren't sure existed. I'm here. I'm going in. Is Ren expecting you? She's meeting me at the security desk. Mara. Yeah. Thank you. She almost laughed. Almost. Don't thank me yet. Thank me Thursday if the panel says yes. She hung up. Titan pulled over on a mountain road overlooking a valley that was green and deep and indifferent to everything happening in its shadow. He killed the engine, sat in the silence, listened to the ticking of cooling metal and the wind in the trees and the sound of his own heartbeat, which had been elevated for 3 days and was only now beginning to slow. His phone buzzed. Reno, from the clubhouse. Problem. The word hit like cold water. Talk. Derek Voss just showed up at the clubhouse. Titan's hand closed on the handlebar. He's alone. Drove up in his truck 5 minutes ago, parked in the lot, walked to the front door. He's asking for you by name. Where's Rachel? Back room with Eli. Bishop's with them. Doors locked. Does Voss know they're there? He knows. He said, and I'm quoting, "Tell Mason Cross that he's got something that belongs to me, and I want it back." Titan's jaw tightened until the scar along his temple went white. He's not talking about the documents, Reno said. He's talking about Rachel. I know what he's talking about. What do you want us to do? Titan stared at the valley, the green, the depth, the indifference of geography to the wars fought on its surface. His bike ticked beneath him. The wind carried the smell of pine and wet rock and something older, the smell of mountains that had been here before humans arrived and would be here long after they finished tearing each other apart. "Keep him there," Titan said. "Don't touch him. Don't threaten him. Don't let him pass the front room, but keep him there." "How long?" "Until I get back." "Titan, that's 3 hours." Then he waits 3 hours. He kicked the engine alive, swung the bike around, hit the road at a speed that would have cost him his license if anyone had been watching, but the only witnesses were the trees and the mountains and the ghosts of every choice he'd ever made lining the road like mile markers. 3 hours. Derek Voss was in his clubhouse. Rachel and Eli were in the back room. And somewhere between the mountains and Black Ridge, Titan rode with nothing in his saddlebags but blank paper and everything in his chest, every ounce of fury and purpose, and the specific kind of love that men like him never named but would die for without hesitation. At the clubhouse, Reno stood in the front room with his arms crossed and his back against the wall, and his eyes locked on Derek Voss, the way a man watches an unexploded ordnance, not with fear, but with the absolute attention of someone who knows what happens when the wrong thing moves. Voss sat in a folding chair in the center of the room. He was younger than his file suggested, 34 but looking 28, the kind of lean, sharp-featured man who'd learned early that a smile was a weapon and charm was cheaper than a fist. He wore clean jeans, a button-down shirt, work boots that had never touched a worksite. His hands were folded in his lap, relaxed, the posture of someone who believed he was in control of a situation he'd engineered. He was wrong. "Nice place," Voss said, looking around the shop. "Very authentic." Reno didn't respond. "You know, I've been patient." Voss uncrossed his legs, recrossed them. Casual. "Rachel and I have our issues, like any couple, but this, involving strangers, taking my family from their home, this is a little much, don't you think?" Reno didn't respond. "The kid, too." Voss shook his head. "Eli's a sweet kid. Imaginative. Makes up stories. You should hear some of the things he comes up with." He smiled. "I'm sure he's shown you his little notebook, full of fairy tales." From the back room, through the locked door, came the faint sound of Eli's voice asking a question, and Bishop's whisper answering. Voss's head turned toward the sound. His smile widened. "There they are." "You sit where you are," Reno said. First words, delivered with the temperature of a surgical instrument. "Or what?" Voss's smile didn't waver. "You'll hit me? In front of the lady lawyers and the witnesses and whatever cameras you've got running? Go ahead. Give my attorney something to work with." He knew. He knew exactly what the vultures could and couldn't do. He'd been briefed, coached, armed with the specific knowledge of how to provoke without providing cause. He was performing. Every word was scripted. Every gesture was calculated. He was a tool, a precision-engineered instrument of provocation. And he'd been sent here to create exactly the kind of incident that would give Hart's attorneys the lever they needed. Reno understood this. Reno had spent 15 years reading rooms the way other people read books, chapter by chapter, sentence by sentence, word by word. He saw the trap. He saw the architecture of it, and he refused to step inside. "You can wait," Reno said, "or you can leave. Those are your options." "I'll wait." Voss settled back in his chair. "I've got all day. 2 hours and 41 minutes. That's how long Derek Voss sat in that folding chair while Reno stood against the wall and the clubhouse held its breath. Dutch arrived after the first hour and took up position by the door. Coyote came in after the second and leaned against the workbench, arms folded, saying nothing. They rotated in like sentinels. Never more than 3, never less than 2, never close enough to touch, never far enough to lose sight. Voss talked. He talked about the weather, about the Steelers, about a restaurant he'd been to in Pittsburgh, about how Rachel was a good woman who just needed stability, about how Eli needed a father figure, about how all of this could be resolved with a simple conversation between reasonable adults. Nobody answered. Nobody reacted. The words fell into the room and died on the concrete floor like insects hitting a windshield. And with every unanswered sentence, something in Voss's carefully constructed composure began to fracture. Not visibly, not dramatically, but in the micro-expressions, The slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible increase in his blink rate, the way his folded hands gradually clenched into something that wasn't quite a fist but wasn't relaxed anymore either. He wasn't used to silence. He was used to fear. He was used to women who flinched and children who hid and institutions that crumbled. He was used to being the loudest, most dangerous thing in the room. He was not in that room anymore. At 6:17, the sound of a Harley filled the parking lot. A single engine. Low, steady, certain. It cut off. Boots on asphalt. The front door opened. Titan walked in. He was wet from the mountain roads. His leather was dark with rain. His face was drawn, the skin tight across the bones, the exhaustion of 3 days without sleep carving shadows under his eyes that made them look less like eyes and more like something lit from behind. He stopped 6 feet from Voss. He didn't sit, didn't speak, just stood there, filling the space between the door and the chair with the particular gravity of a man who had spent 3 hours on a motorcycle turning fury into something colder and more precise than fury, something that didn't need volume or violence to communicate exactly what it was. Voss looked up at him. The smile was still there, but it had thinned, stretched, the smile of someone who had been sitting in a room full of men who wouldn't break, and who was now looking at the man who'd made them that way. "Mason Cross," Voss said. "We finally meet." Titan looked at him. Really looked. The way you look at a mechanism, not at its surface, but at its function, its purpose, the thing it was designed to do. "You're in my house," Titan said. "I'm here to pick up my family." "They're not your family. Rachel and I..." "Rachel filed a lien contest this morning. Your mother's notary stamp is on 8 fraudulent property transfers. Miguel Delgado is prepared to testify to a federal prosecutor. And your employer, Ridgeline Holdings, owned by Commissioner Gerald Hart, is currently under review by a DOJ task force that doesn't answer to anyone in this county." Titan delivered each sentence like a nail driven into wood. Clean, sequential, irreversible. Voss's smile died. Not slowly. All at once. Like a light switch. "You don't..." "I'm not finished." Titan's voice didn't rise. It dropped. "You came here to provoke an incident. You were sent here by people who think they can control this situation the way they've controlled every situation for the last 5 years. Through intimidation, manipulation, and the systematic abuse of people who don't have the resources to fight back." He took one step closer. Not threatening, defining, establishing the precise distance between himself and the thing in the chair. "That's over. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now." Voss stood. The chair scraped back. His composure was crumbling in real time, the charm dissolving like paper in water, and underneath it was the face of the man that Rachel and Eli saw behind closed doors. Tight, flushed, the muscles working around his jaw, his eyes holding the particular fury of a predator who has just discovered he's inside a cage. "You think a bunch of bikers and a legal aid lawyer are going to take down Gerald Hart?" Voss's voice cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with." Titan held his gaze. "A man who beats a woman and terrorizes a child and calls it love. A man who steals houses from people who can't fight back. A man who sat in that chair for 3 hours trying to bait someone into hitting him so his boss could use it in court." He paused. "I know what you are, Derek. And more importantly, the federal government is about to know too." Something broke in Voss's face. The last pretense, the last layer of performance. What remained was raw and ugly and afraid. The face of a bully confronting, for the first time in his life, a wall that wouldn't move. "Hart will bury you," Voss said. "All of you. Every single one." "He can try." Voss stared at Titan for 5 seconds. Then he looked past him, at Reno against the wall, at Dutch by the door, at Coyote at the workbench, at the locked door to the back room where his control over Rachel and Eli ended and something else began. He turned, walked to the door. Dutch stepped aside, not out of deference but with the deliberate movement of a man opening a cage to let something leave. Voss stopped in the doorway, turned back. "You know what happens now, right?" His voice was different, stripped, the voice of a man dropping his last pretense. "Hart doesn't lose. He doesn't get investigated. He doesn't go to court. He makes problems disappear. People disappear. Then he's going to have a hard time making 22 of us disappear at once. Voss looked at him one more time. Then he walked out. His truck started. His headlights swept the parking lot. The engine noise faded down the block and merged with the ambient drone of a town that didn't know yet that its foundations were cracking. Titan stood in the empty front room. The folding chair sat in the center, still warm. The space where Voss had been held the chemical residue of his cologne, and the invisible weight of every threat he'd made and every threat he hadn't needed to make because the system made them for him. Titan walked to the back room, knocked. Bishop opened the door. Behind him, Rachel sat on the sleeping pad with Eli curled against her side, the notebook held in both hands, his eyes closed but his grip fierce, the grip of a child holding the only truth he owned. Rachel looked up at Titan. Her eyes asked the question. "He's gone," Titan said. "For how long?" Titan didn't answer, because the answer was one he couldn't give. Not honestly, not yet. Voss was gone from this building, but Voss was a component in a machine, and the machine was still running, and somewhere in Blackridge, Gerald Hart was receiving a phone call from a man who was about to tell him that the bikers couldn't be provoked, the evidence was gone, and the walls were closing in. And men like Hart, when the walls closed in, didn't negotiate. They didn't retreat. They escalated. Because the only move left when your empire starts to crumble is to bring down everything around you and hope you can build something new from the rubble. Titan's phone buzzed. Mara. Documents delivered. Ren has everything. She's reviewing tonight. Panel meets Thursday at 9. That's 36 hours. 36 hours. 36 hours. And somewhere in that window, Gerald Hart was going to make his final move. Not through lawyers, not through police, not through the careful, patient machinery of institutional corruption that had served him for years. Something faster, something desperate, something aimed directly at the people who had dared to fight back. Titan looked at Eli sleeping against his mother, at the notebook in the boy's hands, at Rachel's arm around her son, not just holding him, but positioning herself between him and the door, the body language of a mother who had become a shield. He closed the door softly, turned to Reno. Full lockdown. Every member at the clubhouse. Nobody leaves, nobody sleeps. We hold this building and the people inside it for 36 hours. And if they come? Titan looked toward the front door, toward the street, toward the dark that was falling over Blackridge like a curtain dropping on the last act of something that had been building for years. Then they find out what happens when you corner 22 men who've already decided they're not moving. The night fell. The clubhouse locked. The engines cooled. And inside, in a room made of cinder block and steel, a brotherhood of wounded men formed a perimeter around a woman and a boy and a notebook full of truth and waited for whatever was coming through the dark. They came at 4 a.m, not with sirens, not with warrants, not with the institutional machinery that Gerald Hart had spent years building and controlling. They came the way desperate men come when the architecture of their power is collapsing, fast, sloppy, and loud. 3 vehicles, 2 SUVs and Voss's gray truck with the dented fender. They rolled onto the block outside the clubhouse with their headlights blazing, engines gunning, the kind of arrival designed to shock and disorient. Doors opened. 6 men stepped out. Not police. Private. The same men who'd been driving the sedans, supplemented by 2 more that Titan didn't recognize. Thick-necked, jacket bulging, the posture of men who solved problems with proximity and volume. Titan was already at the window. He hadn't slept. None of them had. The clubhouse had spent the night in a state of suspended tension. Men sitting in chairs with their boots on, coffee going cold in their hands, the low murmur of conversations that weren't really conversations but the verbal equivalent of checking your pulse to make sure you're still alive. 6, Reno said from the other window. Plus Voss. Armed? Can't tell. Jackets are heavy enough. Titan turned to the room. 17 men on their feet. Some had been dozing. None were dozing now. Nobody goes outside. Nobody opens the door. Nobody engages. And if they try to come in? Dutch asked. This is private property. They have no authority and no warrant. If they force entry, it's breaking and entering, and every phone in this room starts recording. Coyote held up his phone. already recording. Of course he was. Coyote had spent 6 years learning the difference between what the law says and what the law does, and he'd learned it the hard way. Outside, Voss stepped forward. He stood in the parking lot with his hands at his sides, rain damp from the overnight mist, his face stripped of every trace of the charm he'd worn like a costume for years. What remained was the underneath, the lean, predatory geometry of a man who had run out of scripts and was operating now on pure instinct. "Cross!" His voice carried through the cinder block walls. Not a shout, a bark. The sound of a man who was used to making people jump. "You've got 5 minutes. Send Rachel and the boy out. This ends now." Nobody inside moved. "You hear me? 5 minutes. After that, I make a call, and this building gets a visit from every agency in the county. Building code, fire marshal, health department. You want to explain to a judge why you've got a woman and child sleeping in an industrial building with no residential permit?" The threat was real. It was Hart's playbook. Not violence, but bureaucracy weaponized into a bludgeon. The same strategy that had worked on 19 families. The same slow legal suffocation that turned homes into prisons and silence into consent. But Titan had stopped playing defense 36 hours ago. He pulled out his phone, dialed. The line rang twice. "Wren. Ms. Wren, Mason Cross. We spoke through Mara Sinclair." "Mr. Cross, I have your documents. I'm preparing for the panel in..." She checked something. 4 hours. "I'm calling because the subjects of your investigation are currently outside my building with 6 associates, demanding I hand over a material witness and her child." Silence on the line. Then, in the clipped voice of a federal prosecutor who had just been handed a gift, "Are you recording this?" "Every phone in the building. Keep recording. Do not engage. Do not open the door. I'm going to make a call." "To who?" "The U.S. Marshal's field office in Pittsburgh. If Derek Voss and associates are attempting to intimidate witnesses connected to an active federal investigation, that's obstruction. And obstruction doesn't need a panel review to act on." She hung up. Titan looked at the room. "We wait." They waited. Voss paced the parking lot. His men stood by their vehicles with their arms crossed, performing the theater of intimidation the way actors perform Shakespeare. Big gestures, borrowed words, none of it original. Every few minutes, Voss would shout something new at the building. Demands, threats. The language of a man who had been the biggest thing in every room he'd ever entered, and who was now standing outside a locked door, screaming at Cinderblock, and beginning to understand that the door wasn't going to open. At 5:40, Voss's phone rang. He answered, listened. His face changed. The color drained from it in stages. First the flush of anger fading, then the normal tone beneath it, then something paler, grayer, the complexion of a man receiving news that rearranges the furniture of his entire life. He lowered the phone, stared at it. Then he turned to his men and said something too quiet to hear through the walls. They looked at each other. One of them got back in an SUV, then another. The retreat happened in pieces, not a coordinated withdrawal, but the slow individual collapse of men realizing that the thing they'd been paid to protect was no longer worth protecting. Voss was the last to leave. He stood alone in the parking lot, his truck idling behind him, staring at the clubhouse door with an expression that Titan recognized from the other side of the glass. Not anger anymore, not calculation, something emptier, the face of a man standing in the space where his certainty used to be and finding nothing there. He got in his truck. He drove away. 37 minutes later, Titan's phone rang. Mara. The panel approved the investigation. Wren has full subpoena authority. Asset freeze on Ridgeline Holdings effective immediately. And Titan, the marshals picked up Voss on Route 9 20 minutes ago. He was heading for the state line. Titan sat down. Not in a chair. On the floor, his back against the cinder block wall, his boots flat on the concrete, his hands resting on his knees. The phone was still pressed to his ear, but he'd stopped hearing Mara's voice. He was listening to something else. The sound of a machine stopping. The sound of gears that had been grinding for years finally seizing, locking, going still. Titan? You there? I'm here. Emmerich was arrested at his home at 6 this morning. Wren had the marshals coordinate simultaneous operations. Emmerich, Voss, and Leonard Foyle, Hart's chief of staff, all three in custody. Hart? Not yet. He's the big fish. Wren wants to build the case from the bottom up. Flip Emmerich or Foyle, get them to testify against Hart directly. She says it could take weeks, maybe months. But the machine is stopped. The machine is stopped. Titan closed his eyes. The wall was cold against his back. The concrete was cold against his legs. Everything was cold and hard and real, and for the first time in 6 days, the coldness felt like something he could rest against instead of something he had to push through. Titan. Mara's voice softened. There's one more thing. Karen Voss, turned herself in an hour ago. She walked into the federal building in Pittsburgh with her own attorney and a box of documents. She's cooperating. Why? I don't know. Maybe she saw the writing on the wall. Maybe she couldn't carry it anymore. Pause. People do that sometimes. Carry things until the carrying is worse than the letting go. Titan opened his eyes. Across the room, Dutch was sitting in a folding chair with his head in his hands, not from despair but from the specific exhaustion of a man who has been holding tension in his body for days and is finally allowing the muscles to unclench. Reno leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard gaze of someone processing an outcome he hadn't fully believed was possible. Coyote had his phone in his hand, recording stopped, staring at the blank screen like it was a window into a future he was trying to trust. And Harlow sat on the workbench with his legs dangling, his hands flat on the wood, his breathing slow and steady. No 4-count, no technique, just breath. Somewhere in the last 36 hours, in the act of protecting something real and present and alive, the ghosts that haunted him had retreated. Not vanished, they never vanished, but they'd given him room. Go tell Rachel, Titan said into the phone. Then he corrected himself. No, I'll tell her. He stood, his knees cracked, his back ached, his body cataloged every hour of the last 6 days in the language of muscle and bone, a language that didn't lie. He walked to the back room and knocked. Bishop opened the door. Behind him, Rachel was awake, sitting on the edge of the sleeping pad with Eli curled beside her, still asleep, the notebook wedged between his arm and his ribs like a teddy bear made of paper and truth. Titan looked at Rachel. It's over. 2 words. She stared at him, searching, the way she always searched. Not for deception, but for the specific weight that distinguished a real thing from a performed thing. Whatever she found made her close her eyes. Her hand went to her mouth. Her shoulders shook once. Just once. A single convulsion of something that had been held inside a body for so long that releasing it felt less like relief and more like a detonation. Controlled, internal, devastating in its quietness. She didn't cry. Rachel Mercer had stopped crying months ago because crying required the belief that someone might hear you, and she'd lost that belief the second time the police didn't come. What she did instead was breathe, one long, slow, shaking breath that started in her chest and traveled through her entire body like a wave passing through still water. Eli stirred, opened his eyes, looked up at his mother's face, and then at Titan standing in the doorway. And in the half-awake logic of a child waking from a place where the world is still uncertain, he asked, the only question that mattered, are we safe? Titan knelt. The way he'd knelt in the gas station parking lot 6 days ago, bringing himself down to the boy's level, meeting his eyes with the same steady, unblinking attention that had made Eli trust him in the first place. Yeah, kid, you're safe. Eli looked at him. Then he looked at his notebook. Then he looked at his mother, and then he did something he hadn't done in 5 months. He set the notebook down. Not beside him, not under his arm. He set it on the sleeping pad, loose, unguarded. The way you set down a weapon when the war is over and your hands remember what they were made for before they learned to fight. The days that followed moved at the speed of paperwork and testimony, and the slow, grinding machinery of federal justice finally pointed in the right direction. Wren's team dismantled Ridgeline Holdings piece by piece. The asset freeze locked every property in the portfolio. The subpoenas pulled financial records from banks in 3 states. The paper trail that Mara had built, From Eli's notebook to Miguel Delgado's documents to Karen Voss's cooperation, provided the skeleton, and the federal investigators put meat on the bones. Emmerich broke first. 48 hours in federal custody, separated from the local network that had protected him, facing obstruction and conspiracy charges that carried decades. He requested a meeting with Wren's team and started talking. He gave them heart. Not in pieces, in bulk. Dates, accounts, meetings, directives. The entire architecture of a corruption network that had been operating in Blackridge for nearly a decade, hidden behind the legitimate functions of county government like a parasite living inside the walls of a house. Hart was arrested on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the panel review. U.S. Marshals served the warrant at his office in the county building, in front of his staff, in front of the portrait of himself that hung behind his desk. The portrait showed a smiling man in a blue suit. The man they led out in handcuffs was smaller, grayer, diminished, the way all men are diminished when the machinery they built to make themselves large is taken apart and they're left standing in their actual dimensions. The lien on Rachel's house was dissolved. The fraudulent filing by Blackstone Property Services was vacated by federal order, and the company itself was placed into receivership pending criminal proceedings. Rachel's title was clean. The house was hers. The house had always been hers, but now the paper said so in a way that couldn't be forged, manipulated, or stolen by a man with a smile and a plan. The other families, all 19 of them, began the process of recovering what had been taken. It wasn't fast. It wasn't clean. Some of the properties had been sold to third parties who'd purchased in good faith. Some had been demolished. Some had been rezoned and rebuilt into things the original owners wouldn't recognize. The federal court appointed a special master to untangle the web, and the untangling would take months, maybe years. But the families had something they hadn't had before. They had a record. They had a voice. They had the knowledge that what had been done to them was not their fault, was not a mystery, was not the inevitable consequence of being poor or powerless or alone. It was a crime. And someone was finally calling it that. Miguel Delgado got his house back. Not the house itself, that had been gutted and flipped and sold to a young couple from out of state who didn't know its history. But the court ordered financial restitution based on fair market value, and Miguel, standing in Mara's office with the check in his hand, looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, and when Mara asked if he was okay, he said, "I spent 18 months thinking I was crazy, that maybe I lost my own house through my own stupidity. Now I know I wasn't crazy. That's worth more than the money." 4 months after the arrests, Blackridge held a community gathering. It wasn't organized by the town. The town's official structures were still in disarray. The county commission had 3 empty seats, the police department was under federal oversight, and the planning commission had been dissolved pending a complete review of every zoning decision made in the last decade. The gathering was organized by the families, by Rachel, by Miguel, by the Garcias and the Robinsons and the Petersons and the others who had found each other through the wreckage of what Ridgeline had done and had discovered in the finding that the isolation they'd each endured was itself a weapon that lost its power the moment you realized you weren't the only one. They held it at the old VFW Hall, the same building where the steel vultures gathered every Saturday, the same parking lot where an 8-year-old boy had crossed the asphalt and asked a stranger how to report a bad man. The October air was cool and smelled like fallen leaves and motor oil and the last gasp of summer hanging on in the warm spots where the sun hit the brick walls. Inside the hall, long tables held food that people had brought from home, casseroles and sheet cakes and slow cooker chilies, and the kind of coffee that came in industrial-sized percolators and tasted like it had been brewed by someone who believed coffee should be a civic duty, not a pleasure. The steel vultures arrived at noon. Not in formation, not with the thunderous announcement of a column of Harleys shaking the windows. They came in 2s and 3s, parking their bikes along the curb, walking into the hall with the awkward, slightly displaced energy of men who were more comfortable on a road or in a garage than in a room full of civilians eating potato salad. Bishop carried a box of medical supplies that nobody had asked for and set them on a table in the corner, because Bishop always carried medical supplies and he always set them in a corner. And that was its own kind of language, the language of a man who had spent his life preparing for the worst and who expressed care through readiness. Coyote brought his toolbox. He'd spent the morning at Rachel's house replacing the rotted porch support post. He'd measured it, cut it, set it in place, and sealed it. And when Rachel asked him why, he said, "Your old man built this porch. Deserves to stand straight." He said it without looking at her, the way men who have spent years learning to hide their tenderness deliver it, sideways, through objects, through the work of their hands. Dutch stood near the entrance, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the room with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had worried this would end badly and was allowing himself, slowly and with appropriate caution, to believe that it hadn't. Harlow sat at a table with Eli. The two of them bent over a piece of paper, drawing motorcycles. Harlow drew the mechanical parts, engines, frames, exhaust systems, with the precision of someone who understood machines. Eli drew the riders, exaggerated figures in leather cuts with oversized boots and helmets that looked like astronaut gear. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They communicated the way people communicate when words are unreliable, and the only trustworthy language is presence. I'm here, you're here, that's enough. Reno leaned against the wall near the back, a cigarette behind his ear that he would never light indoors, watching everything with the same measured attention he brought to every room. He'd been the one to debrief with Wren's team. He'd been the one to organize the club's records. He'd been the one who made sure every piece of evidence was preserved, every chain of custody maintained, every procedural requirement satisfied. He'd done it without complaint, without recognition, without needing anyone to notice. That was Reno, the man behind the wall, the one who made sure the wall stayed standing. Titan arrived last. He parked his Softail at the far end of the curb and sat on it for a moment, helmet in his lap, looking at the VFW hall. The same building, the same parking lot, the same cracked asphalt, but different. Changed by what had happened here and what had started here and what had ended because a boy crossed a parking lot and trusted a stranger. He walked in. The room was full. Families he'd never met were talking to families he'd fought for. Children were running between tables. Someone had put music on, not loud, just enough to fill the silence, the kind of classic rock that lived in every jukebox and every dive bar and every blue-collar town in America. The soundtrack of people who worked with their hands and carried their losses in their bodies and kept going because keeping going was the only option that didn't require giving up. Rachel found him near the coffee. She looked different, not transformed. That was a movie word, and this wasn't a movie. She looked rested. The dark circles were fading, the long sleeves were gone. She wore a short-sleeved shirt and the scars on her forearms, faint, old, from years before Derek Voss. From a period in her life she'd mentioned to Mara in a quiet conversation that Mara had shared with no one except a referral to a counselor who understood, were visible and uncovered. Not displayed. Not hidden. Just there. Part of the topography of a woman who had survived things and was no longer ashamed of the marks they'd left. "He's been asking about you," Rachel said, nodding toward the table where Eli and Harlow were drawing. "Yeah? He wants to know if bikers go to school. I told him some do. He said he wants to be a biker and a scientist. I told him that sounded like a solid plan." Titan almost smiled. Almost. "How are you?" he asked. Rachel considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I sleep now, the whole night. I leave the dresser where it belongs." She paused. "I signed up Eli for a new school. Fresh start. He's nervous. I'm nervous. But nervous is better than scared." "It is." "Mason." She said his name the way she'd said it on the porch in the rain, with the particular weight of a person using a name they'd earned the right to use. "I need to say something, and I need you to hear it without deflecting." "Okay." "You saved our lives. I know you'll say you didn't. I know you'll say it was the club or Mara or the federal prosecutor or the evidence. And all of that is true. But you knelt on a parking lot and listened to my son, and that was the moment everything changed. Not because of what you did after, because of what you did right then. You knelt down and you listened." Titan's jaw worked. He looked at the floor, at his boots on the worn linoleum, at the coffee in his hand that he hadn't tasted. "I almost didn't," he said. Rachel waited. 4 years ago, there was another kid, different town, different situation, same kind of trouble. He spoke slowly, each word extracted from a place he kept locked. I got involved, got in too deep, made it personal. The case fell apart because I pushed too hard, and the kid, he stopped, breathed. The kid went into the system, foster care. I lost track of him. I tried to find him. I couldn't. The room moved around them, music, laughter, the clink of plates and the hum of conversation. But in the space between Titan and Rachel, there was only the sound of a man finally saying the thing that had been sitting in the dark of his apartment, in a photo folder he never opened, in the bourbon he never drank for 4 years. His name was Jesse. He was 6. Titan's voice was steady, the steadiness of a man who had practiced carrying weight until the carrying looked effortless. I see his face every time I close my eyes. I saw his face when Eli walked across that parking lot, and Dutch was right. He told me this wasn't that Eli wasn't a second chance, that I needed to think straight, and he was right. But maybe it was. Maybe that's okay. Maybe the only way to live with the ones you couldn't save is to make damn sure you save the next one. Rachel looked at him for a long time. Then she did something she hadn't done with anyone in months, maybe years. She reached out and put her hand on his forearm. Not a grip, not a plea, just contact. The simple, terrifying, irreplaceable act of one human being touching another and meaning nothing by it except, I see you. Titan looked at her hand on his arm, at the scars on her wrist, at the strength in her fingers. Thank you, he said, and the words came out different than he expected. Not heavy, not burdened, but clean, stripped of everything except the thing they meant. Rachel squeezed his arm once and let go. Across the room, Eli had finished his drawing. He slid off the bench and walked toward Titan with the paper held in front of him like a flag of truce. The drawing showed a line of motorcycles, crooked, colorful, each one ridden by a stick figure in a jacket with a bird on the back. And in front of the formation, smaller than the rest but leading the way, was a stick figure on a bicycle carrying something square and recognizable, a notebook. That's me, Eli said, pointing to the bicycle rider. I can see that. And that's you. He pointed to the biggest motorcycle. And that's Reno, and that's the quiet man, Bishop. And that's the young guy who draws with me, Harlow. It's good, Titan said. Real good. Eli looked up at him. The searching was gone. The testing was gone. Whatever algorithm the boy had been running since the day he crossed the parking lot had reached its conclusion, and the conclusion was standing in front of him in a leather cut with a vulture on the back, holding a cup of bad coffee and looking at a child's drawing like it was the most important document he'd ever been handed. I got a new notebook, Eli said. He reached into his back pocket and pulled it out. Brand new, blue cover, unbent spine. What's in this one? Nothing yet. Mom says I should write things I want to do, not things that happened. Things I want to happen. Titan looked at the blank notebook, at the empty pages waiting to be filled with something other than evidence and dates and the documentation of violence, at the future that an 8-year-old boy was learning to hold in his hands instead of the past. That sounds like a plan, Titan said. Eli grinned, the grin of a kid who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had finally set it down and discovered that his hands still worked, his arms still lifted, his face still remembered how to do this thing. The simple, extraordinary, ordinary thing. He ran back to the table. Harlow was already sharpening a pencil for him. Titan stood by the coffee table and watched the room. The families, the bikers, the noise and the food and the music and the ordinary chaos of people who had been through something terrible and were choosing, despite everything, to be in the same room together and call it a celebration. Dutch appeared at his shoulder. 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Titan. You talked to her? Yeah. You tell her about Jesse? Yeah. Dutch nodded, sipped his coffee, looked at the room. Bishop wants to set up a permanent watch rotation for the families, monthly check-ins. Not just Rachel, all of them. He's already drawn up a schedule. Of course he has. Coyote's talking about expanding the repair clinic, offering free services to the Ridgeline families, cars, appliances, whatever they need. Good. And Harlow, Dutch paused. Harlow asked if we could start a youth program. Not boxing, that's my thing. Something different. Mechanics. Teaching kids to fix things. Titan looked at Harlow across the room, bent over a table with an 8-year-old boy, drawing motorcycles, present and calm, and anchored in a way that 6 months of therapy hadn't managed. Sometimes the thing that heals you isn't the treatment, it's the purpose. Tell him yes, Titan said. Dutch nodded. They stood together in the comfortable silence of men who had survived enough to know that silence between friends isn't empty. It's full of everything that doesn't need to be said because it's already been proven. The afternoon wound down slowly. Families left in clusters, carrying foil-wrapped plates and the quiet satisfaction of people who had been seen and heard and believed. The VFW hall emptied in stages. Tables were folded, chairs were stacked. The coffee percolator was unplugged and left to cool, its work done. Rachel and Eli were among the last to leave. Eli carried his new notebook in one hand and Harlow's motorcycle drawing in the other. Rachel carried the duffel bag she'd packed the night they'd come to the clubhouse, lighter now, as if the weight it held had been distributed among the people in the room and was no longer hers alone. At the door, she turned. "Saturday," she said to Titan. "Eli wants to watch the bikes, if you're doing your ride." "We're always doing the ride." "Then we'll be there." She walked out into the October afternoon with her son, and the light caught her face. The first real sun in days, breaking through the clouds with the tentative warmth of something that wasn't certain it was welcome, but was showing up anyway. Titan stood in the parking lot and watched them go. Then he looked at the asphalt. At the spot where Eli had stood 6 weeks ago, notebook pressed to his chest, sneakers scuffed, asking a question that changed everything. The spot was just asphalt. Cracked, weedy, ordinary. But Titan could see it. The ghost of a moment, the echo of a small voice asking the simplest, hardest question a child can ask. How do you report a bad man? You don't, kid. You find good men. And if you're lucky, if you're brave enough to cross a parking lot and trust a stranger, the good men find you. Titan put on his helmet, started his bike. The engine turned over with the deep, familiar rumble that had been the soundtrack of his life for 20 years. The sound of a machine that kept running because someone cared enough to maintain it, to fix what broke, to replace what wore out, to keep the thing moving forward through rain and dark, and the long stretches of empty road where the only company was the vibration in your hands and the knowledge that somewhere ahead the road led to something worth riding toward. He pulled out of the lot. Dutch fell in behind him. Then Reno, then Bishop, silent as always, his bike immaculate, then Coyote, then Harlow, steady-handed, eyes clear. One by one, the steel vultures formed up behind their president and rolled onto the street in a loose, unhurried column. Not riding toward anything, not riding away from anything, just riding, together, the way they always did, the way they always would. The sound filled the block, rolled between the houses, shook the windows of the VFW hall and rattled the leaves in the gutters and carried across the town of Blackridge like a heartbeat, steady, persistent, alive. And on the sidewalk, walking home in the October sun with his mother's hand in his and a blank notebook in his pocket, Eli Mercer heard the engines and smiled. Not because the sound was loud, because it sounded like safety.